We are here for a special meeting of the Board of County Commissioners. It's just a bit after 5 o'clock. Peter, are we doing public comment at some point?
Yep, it's first thing on your agenda.
Oh, duh, 5 o'clock public comment.
Sorry.
If anybody has come here in the room to make a public comment, now's your chance.
We may, because of the way the agenda has evolved, want to offer public comment at the top of 6 o'clock too.
I agree with that.
Yeah, same.
Okay, knowing you'll have another chance, more related to the fire authority conversation at 6. The 505 topic is around grants for the
Yes, that's correct.
jurisdictional housing authority. So seeing no one in the room, anyone online?
We have one person online and they are not raising their hands, so nope.
All right, so then we'll close public comment for now and move on to the action session. Consideration approval of county grant application to the Health Disparities and Community Grant Program. Amy.
Yes, thank you. Today, we are here to seek your approval on a grant application to this Health Disparities and Community Grant Program. It's a CDPHE grant. We are taking advantage of this program to take advantage of really the confluence of public health and housing. Housing is one of the social determinants of health, and this grant gives an opportunity to get funding for programs that are launched to advance social determinants of health programs that support social determinants of health. And we, the multi-jurisdictional housing authority really fits quite nicely with it. This program offers funding that no match is required. The funding amounts are $160,000 to $190,000 a year. It's a 3-year program with the first year focused on launch and planning processes, and then years 2 and 3 have to be reapplied for, but you're eligible if you get the first year, and those are more focused on implementation. And so it fits quite well with exiting out of the IHOI grant and getting into the real details of forming the MJHA, and the timing is perfect, and the topic is perfect, and we think, hopefully we'll get it.
So one thing I would add to that is I think coming out of the existing grant cycle, we won't have a set of priorities or goals for that MJHA, and I think that planning process through this grant would help us work with the new board, whoever gets appointed to that MJHA, to set goals for that group. So I think there's a good alignment in terms of helping us how we fund the startup of the housing authority.
So this health grant will be used. The primary focus of the full amount of this grant will be toward setting up the MJHA and getting housing going in order to augment health, correct?
Yes, and potentially assisting us with the funding of those first couple of years to reduce the cost for all of us with respect to how we fund the MJHA. Yes.
Specifically, year 1 would be continuing the planning and the formation of the MJHA board to really detail the business plan for the first year in a collaborative process with the partners, and about 8 months of the first year of operations of the MJHA. And then the subsequent years would be continuing with that work and expanding on the programs that were determined in that planning process by the MJHA board that was formed. And one other thing that we would want to include in this planning process when the board is formed is making sure that the entities are continuing, understand that just even if we do get this grant funding, there would still be a financial commitment to identify and consider and make plans for after this 3 years, alongside the 3 years of grant funding. We would still want to be keeping in mind that there's still the budget and operational expenses of the MJHA to make sure we have a sustainable funding source for.
So do you imagine if we get it, this funding replacing the local government financial commitments that were proposed a couple months ago? Or is this gonna allow our housing authority to do more?
Delay them.
I
Is
would
it
think it
added
would
to-
offset, at least for year one. But that could be, that is open for discussion. I mean, you know, I think that is part of this being a persuasive grant, is that we're offsetting some of those expenses. But I mean, in general, one of the strategic kinds of decisions that we need to make collectively, which would be made in some of this ongoing planning work, is whether to make the partner contributions an annual commitment regardless of the grant funds that came in the door, and that we, as we collectively just say, okay, we're gonna divvy up that annual budget, everybody commits to an annual amount, and if grant funds come in, maybe our partner contributions go into a fund balance that the MGHA can build up over time for match, for bigger construction projects, or for something else. You know, that's a strategic decision that I think would be ideally made by that board once it's formed, that has representation from all the partners. And I think that's the ideal. That would be a perfect decision, type of decision or discussion, at least for that table.
I guess I look at it a little differently. I mean, 3 years is a long time.
Mhm.
And 3 years from now, I might personally say this is one of the greatest programs we've ever had, or at one end of the extreme, the other end is, this is totally worthless. Let's unplug it and not waste any of our money.
Yep.
And I'm sure that'll fall somewhere in between, but I think the concept of trying to imagine ahead of time, how I'm gonna feel about it in 3 years when, oh, well, I want to be in office, so that part won't matter, but yeah,
I was just gonna say,
there's a lot of
after a
unknowns.
year, nobody will care.
So,
Um,
Commissioner, do you mean that, what does that mean for how you?
I mean, I'm okay proceeding with this without having to know what year 4 looks like.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
I would personally enter into anything like this with an idea that it could be, who knows what year 4 could look like.
Right.
And I don't hold myself, I don't think I'm smart enough to answer that right now.
We have talked with Georgetown and Idaho Springs, and they do support applying for this grant.
Yeah. With regard to George's question, which seemed to be, we made a commitment without the knowledge of this grant to put a certain amount of money into housing,
Mhm.
correct? That was your question.
We discussed one, yeah.
Yeah, we haven't made the commitment. That's actually going to be on your agenda for an executive session on next Tuesday.
Is it in the budget? I don't recall.
There's nothing identified yet in terms
Okay.
of how you might use.
Also new dollars that we didn't have before.
lodging tax.
Lodging, yeah, right. There's no, you've got the lodging tax sitting there, you've got money sitting there. Hasn't been, you have not made a decision as a board as to how you want to allocate that.
So the question is, what I heard George ask was whether this is additive or whether it's a replacement. And when I heard you say offset, I'm guessing that what offset means is it's a replacement. This is the money we could use to fulfill what we talked about doing. And so we would be using a health disparities and community grant program grant to offset or replace the funding source that we would have used should we given it to a housing grant, right?
Well,
I'm just trying to make sure I understand.
that's, I mean, Brian's sitting here talking, right? We have to have a conversation with our partners also in the end, once that, if we receive that grant.
But what I think Amy and Brian sitting here saying is that if we were to get this grant, it would go into the bucket and reduce the shared nut for everybody to split.
Have we even really contemplated what that budget looks like? I know I saw
Yeah.
something in the
The
presentation.
budget, we anticipate being around $220,000 a year. And this grant is for, we'd be requesting $178,000. So this would leave about $42,000 that would be remaining. Now, that's a fairly constrained number, but, and not all of that, it gets a little, there's some puts and takes in there because some of the $178,000 is for consultant fees for the planning portion, not the $220,000 of operations. but it would offset that $220,000 of operations and then leave a smaller number for the partners to share. But the main message there is that this grant, we would not be seeking this grant to offset the county's contribution to the MGHA. We'd be getting this grant as the collective to contribute to the
Well, we're part of that
MGHA.
collective, though, are we not?
Yes, but
Okay.
we would be,
We're not writing ourselves out of the benefit either.
Right.
no.
It's not
but
just for
we'd
us,
be
in other words.
Contributing this grant, we would be getting it for all of us for the benefit of all the partner entities. And then the remaining expenditure, the remaining costs would be shared then according to whatever metric we agree on.
And the grant application is written to that effect.
Yes.
I'm fine with that. That should make it more competitive. I'm completely on board with this grant application. I think it's a great idea. I'm really happy that our CHAPS plan references the way that our housing market is impacting public health outcomes.
Yeah, I support it as well.
It seems to me like some of the questions around whether we want to, we were pondering around $180,000 for the housing authority, whether the questions around whether we want to continue to do that or realize savings or whatever can be confronted down the line.
Once we know whether we have the money or not.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Maybe in another week or so.
Yeah.
Even.
What is the timeline for the grant and the award?
Well, the year one is July 2024 through June of 2025. So we will know by July this year. We'll know before then. You know, like April, we should know. Yeah.
Oh, not so far away.
So
do
pretty
this
short
week.
timeline.
Okay.
It's due January 31st,
Wednesday.
Wednesday, otherwise known as Wednesday.
Any more discussion need to be had about this? See, this is an action session, so I assume we need a motion to recommend we apply for this grant.
Yeah, I move that we approve the grant application to the Health Disparities in Communities Grant Program.
Second, and I'll add to it and delegate to the county manager the authority to enter into any following award agreements related to the specific application.
Can you speak louder, please, so we can hear?
I will add to that and delegate to the county manager the authority to enter into any following award agreements related to this specific application. Thanks.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Amy
Thank you.
and Brian and staff. Imagine we can just recess till six. We're
I think
recessed
so.
till 6 p.m. Our next topic will be the joint meeting of the municipalities, emergency services general improvement district. We consider the mission CIT final report of the organization review of the Clear Creek County Fire Authority. See you then. Perfect. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are going to have public comment. We had it at 5 o'clock, but we thought it would be important to have it again here at 6 o'clock. So if there's anybody in the room who has come here, who's not sitting at this table to make a public, because you'll be able to make as many comments as you want, to make a public comment, would you please stand up and say what you have to say? Don't see any. Any online?
If you're online and you would like to make a comment, please raise your hand. Nope.
Okay, thank you. So that public comment is closed. I have a few words to say, but before that, I'm going to ask our County Manager Brian to give us a quick readout of kind of how we got here and the study with Mission CIT, and then I'll take it from there.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I'll start by discussing the fact that the most recently amended IGA that created the fire authority, amended late 2022, really went into effect in 23, identified the need for each of the IGA parties to identify representatives of their own municipality to come together to form an RFP committee to draft an RFP to conduct an organizational review of the fire authority. We did that in early 2023, met several times to draft the scope of that RFP, put that out on the street. We received 5 total responses to that RFP. The committee itself conducted interviews, Zoom interviews with each of the entities that submitted to us, all of which were qualified to perform that study, but we did land on the team from Mission CIT, who were successful and entered into a contract with them to conduct, again, an organizational analysis of the fire authority to include funding, policies, procedures, operations, all things related to fire procedures and operating a fire authority. Mission CIT staff was here in August, toured the community, had many meetings with all of the IGA partners, all of the fire authority staff, et cetera, et cetera. So conducted a tremendous number of meetings that have conducted a lot of analysis, provided us an overview of their recommendations and a draft of a report in November. We did submit that report back out to the IGA parties so they could provide some input and thoughts onto that draft before they finalized it in December. And we're here today to give them an opportunity to present to us their recommendations and to give each of the parties to the IGA an opportunity to ask them questions related to those recommendations. Any other thoughts and comments that we might have moving forward. So that's kind of just a real quick and brief synopsis of how we got here tonight.
What I would add to that is there was another study that was done previous to this that had a very specific charter. The question that we asked was, should we merge the fire authority and the county run EMS? And that study cost around the same amount. I don't think it took quite as long, but the answer was no, you shouldn't do that yet. You shouldn't do a Title 32 because you have organizational work to do in each of those organizations before you should combine them or even consider combining them. And then my own personal interest in commissioning this work was really surfaced when we were asked to provide a 10-year IGA, which was kind of business as usual, status quo for 10 more years. And I'm not smart enough to know what's going to happen in 10 years, but just looking at our funding picture and the tax base, it occurred to me that the status quo wasn't going to work for us for the next 10 years. And I kind of wanted to force us to have this conversation and to bring in some experts from the outside world who've looked at this in other communities to give us the best advice about what's the smartest way that we can work together, how much can we, or what will it cost us to provide the level of service that we can afford? And what strategically should we do going forward? What are some potential other funding sources like sales tax that might be available to us? And is there a path where eventually we can combine EMS and fire? So those were the type of things that I wanted to have a future board who's going to be entertaining another extension of an IGA or maybe a completely different type of arrangement after I'm long gone at the end of this year. But the IGA that we signed was a 2-year IGA. That was in December of 22. So it's over this December, and we'll be having this kind of conversation again, which I personally think is good. It's forcing us to have a sober look at the future and figure out what our smartest path is. So, and I'm glad that you're all here. I think this is totally appropriate. We kind of had a similar type of a process when we talked about bringing in Jeff Com for communications, and we deeply value you as our partners, and really ideally the outcome of this conversation will be consensus. So I think that might be all I have to say for now, and I'll leave it to George to maybe add a few words, and then Randy.
I don't think there's much to add to that. I mean, that's a great kind of history of where we are. What I'm interested for tonight is just to do our best to use the time we have with these consultants, make sure we understand their recommendations and the data behind it. And I don't know that we can figure out a process for the rest of the year in this meeting, but what I expect is that the people around this table and people from Silver Plume will be seeing a fair amount of each other this year. And I think that's a good thing.
And I think the only thing I would add is that often in these meetings, silence means different things to different people. And so our engagement, for everybody to have engagement in the meeting, is extremely important. So that we don't assume that silence is consent when silence is actually unspoken opposition or uncertainty. And so it's really, really important that we all engage in the meeting, because there is no consensus unless we've expressed that consensus. And so, so I think, and if we don't reach consensus, consensus is a great goal. It's okay if we don't reach it too, but it needs to be because we expressed and understood that everybody knows where everybody stands and what they're thinking, or whether they just can't make up their mind on whatever's presented tonight and whatever we talk about. So engagement is critical to achieve consent. That's all I got.
Thank you. Any comments from any of the other leaders before I pass this over to Mission CIT? So if you would introduce your team, and then I'll pass it over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, commissioners, judge executives, mayors, administrators, managers, council members, fire chiefs, we certainly are glad to be here tonight to give you an overview of our recommendations and from our report. I think we greatly enjoyed being here, learning about your organization, seeing where it was at, and really looking at everything in detail to put the report together. And you got the copy, so you've distributed some, right? So you're good there. Okay. I'm Frank Edwards. I was the team leader for the project. Keith Brower was
a team follower.
He was on the project, and then we had Karen McQuaid, who was on the project with us. She's not here tonight. Keith and I are the only ones who come back to do the presentation. So we're from a company called Mission CIT. We're based out of Connecticut, but the consultants live all over the country, and we do all kinds of things, grants, training, but my section is the consultant section. So we do fire and EMS consulting. So with that, I'll get into the report. Again, it's going to be an overview. I don't know how y'all want to do questions, whether you want to wait till the end while I'm going through it. What you want to do?
I'm okay with questions during the presentation if you guys are okay with it.
Okay. If I or Keith are talking and we don't see somebody who's raised a hand, please shout out or throw something at us or whatever, so we can acknowledge you. But I'd like to start off and thank everybody for their assistance while we were here, and then certainly after the fact. But and these aren't certainly in any priority order, but certainly the fire chief and the assistant chief were a tremendous help of getting us the detail and the information we needed. One of the things that we did with this project, which we do with all our projects, is we have a work doc folder where the departments can put information and reports into it that the team can access to massage and use. And I don't know, Chief Jones, you put a ton of stuff out there. So there was a bunch of stuff in the work doc folder, but Chief Babion helped a lot, again, to help us understand the organization. Mr. Bosshart for his help. Ms. Ostrom was a tremendous help on the financial piece. Mr. Lickman was a help on the governance piece, as well as some of the financial stuff. All the members of the Clear Creek Fire Authority that we met with, both paid and volunteer. The other emergency services partners we met with EMS, Sheriff's Office, Idaho Springs PD, Georgetown PD, emergency management, Evergreen Fire, those were all in the meeting. And then certainly all of the elected and appointed officials who met with us during our focus group sessions, where we went through our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and challenges. We appreciate the comments and feedback that you gave us. Those comments are there's a summary in the report. All the comments are in the back of the report for you to look at. Let me start off by saying a couple of things about the Clear Creek Fire Authority. The first thing is that the Fire Authority is a good organization with very professional and dedicated members. We didn't work on this report to try to make it sound like, everything's terrible and it's bad, all that. It's a good organization. They have good people. They do a great job. So I wanted to get that up front, first of all. The second thing is the department has made improvements over the last few years between adding some of the paid staffing, doing the the evacuation plans up in St. Mary's. What else did I want to mention? Certainly the volunteer recruitment efforts and using the volunteers and duty crew format. Again, they're all good things that they're trying to do to improve the organization, improve service delivery. And the last thing is, like any organization, any fire organization in particular, has challenges and has needed improvements that it needs to consider moving forward. There is no perfect organization out there. So every organization has challenges, and whether the organization itself has challenges or they're impacted by things external to the organization, that causes challenges for those folks. The next slide is kind of I like to plug this in sometimes. Most people think that organizations, to be successful and to be good organizations, that it's a very linear, always upward approach to get to where they need to be. And that's not the case. There are stops, there's starts, there's twists, there's turns, there's, we're going to do this when that didn't work out. So we're going to stop, we're going to go do something else. But as long as you're continuously looking to improve and making those decisions to improve and making those efforts, and the members of the organization are behind you, you'll get there. But again, it's not a straight linear line. And I just wanted to bring that up to everybody. The next slide, I know it's very detailed or busy there, but that's the items that were listed in the RFP for us to meet moving forward, dealing with the governance, the financial stability, the organization, the operations, policies and procedures, fire prevention, fire protection activities. All of those, again, were listed in the RFP, and we took those very seriously. The next slide, again, is kind of a repeat of what Mr. Bosshart said. 3 of us came on site in August. In addition to the on-site visit, we distributed online organizational surveys to both internal and external stakeholders to the Fire Authority. Internal responses, we had 27 people respond, both career and volunteer. And external responses, we had 39 people respond from the public, but certainly from elected officials as well. And then we sent out a benchmark survey to about 7 similar type fire departments in other parts of the country and Colorado. We got 4 back, and that information is listed in there. I like to do that for a general comparison. It's not typically always apples to apples, but you get a sense of, staffing, finances, cost per capita, stations per square mile, those kinds of things to just give you a general benchmarking set of data to move forward. And that's listed in the report as well. Specifically, again, we held meetings or focus groups with 11 different groups. We met with the chief and the assistant chief multiple times. We met with all the IGA partners, except Silver Plume. We met with the Fire Authority Board of Directors. There were 5 in attendance. We met with 11 volunteer fire personnel. We met with 10 career fire personnel. We met with several of the county department heads, finance, planning, EMS, which is they listed separate there. County attorney we met with. So again, we met with some selected county folks, and then the emergency response partners, which we had 7 in attendance. Again, sheriff's office, emergency management, police. Sheriff was there to talk about dispatch as well. And then we had Evergreen Fire Chief here as well to get that perspective from Evergreen Fire. Okay, from all of that, all the data that we collected, all the stuff that got downloaded for us, we kind of boiled what we were to do. And obviously we went into a lot more detail in the report, but as far as what I want to provide tonight to you in the most detail is 3 priority areas that we came up with from our work. These are in priority order. The first one being that there needs to be a long-term financial plan for the fire authority moving forward. You're bleeding money. You're taking money out of reserves every year for the last 2 or 3. That's only going to get worse. At some point, you're not going to have any reserve. And if everything else stays the same, you won't have money to fund a fire department. So that was the number 1 priority. The second was staffing. And we looked at that in 2 perspectives. And we'll get into more detail about this in a minute. But we wanted to look at what it would be to provide a minimal level of fire protection to the cities and towns where most of the incidents occur. And again, I'll go through that data in a minute. But also, what should the basic level be to the unincorporated areas? And again, Keith is going to go through that in a minute.
Is it? That second bullet seems to state that currently we do not have a minimal level of fire protection. Would you make that statement?
You have a minimal, I don't want to step on your toes.
Go ahead.
You have a minimal level of fire protection that does not meet national standards. How's
Right.
that?
Right, and we'll get into that as far as the NFPA standards and things like that. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
I have a question that's similar to that, and it has more to do with semantics. You have minimal level and basic level. Which of those is less and which is greater? In the last line, I see minimal level on the top
Right.
line. On the bottom line, I see a basic level of response to unincorporated areas. How do you compare minimal to basic?
Well, minimal would pertain more to what we're going to talk about in staffing. Basic level would bring in other operational components like, our crews arriving at the same time, or what is the delay factor, or crews being assembled at the same time. So it's a minimum gallon per minute flow achievable as a basic level of suppression using that.
Okay, I'm just asking if the 2 are differentiated from each other as a level of.
The biggest differentiation there was between the cities and towns and the unincorporated area. That's what we were trying to.
And it's one
So there-
greater and one lesser. That's my question.
The standard covers them a little bit different as far as what should be your staffing
I'm sure the
levels.
balance of your presentation will answer my question.
That question, yes. And the last priority area that we wanted to address was improving the governance structure to provide for more effective communications regarding the fire authority, long-term planning and oversight to the fire authority. Some other areas of focus, and again, we'll get into explain them at the end of the report. We wanted to look at the health and wellness of personnel, the fire personnel in the organization. Are safety practices being utilized? Is equipment appropriate for safety purposes? Volunteer recruitment, retention, and sustainability for the long term. And I'll go ahead and make the statement today that, Clear Creek County needs volunteers, a volunteer component of the fire service moving forward. And if we can grow that, you can grow that to have that be an active part of the fire response. There's no way that the county or the fire authority or whatever that ends up looking like can provide a fully paid type system. And so that we're not trying to say that at all. We also wanted to look at long-term, there's a little piece there. Yeah, long-term capital and facilities planning moving forward. Because again, there's a ton of money invested in apparatus, equipment, the fire stations. And you need to consider an approach so that those can be maintained, adequately replaced, or improved. We also wanted to look at operational policies and procedures. We looked at all of the standard operating guidelines for the fire authority. We looked at their most recent ISO report, Insurance Services Organization grading report. So again, we looked at all of those, and so again, we've got some recommendations in there. And then the last item was emergency services and jurisdictional communications. Communications between the fire authority and EMS, fire authority and law enforcement, fire authority and the towns, fire authority in the county. Again, there's improvements that need to be made in those communication channels and frequencies that I think would do everybody well to have a more frequent, open dialogue. Again, I apologize for this, but this was just a call load showing for the last 5 years, the call load of the fire authority. It went up during the COVID years, 2020, 2021, 2022. It came down slightly in 2023 by about 150 to 175, I think, from what I remember, the calls. The next slide,
Like general alarms versus EMS related.
that is all calls that the fire authority went to.
Do you know a breakdown between those two?
Next slide is that. Again, that's all the call types or the major call types, starting from left to right, and that's 5 years worth of data. Because you can't see the colors probably up there good. The one on the far left is fires. The second one is rescue and EMS. The third is hazardous condition. The fourth is good intent, and the last is false alarms.
And just real quick, to those of you squinting at this monitor, there's one behind you too.
Good intent would be somebody sees smoke potentially and just calls it in, for example. It turns out to be a legal control burn, had a good intent. But it's not a false alarm. It was an actual
I see.
case of burning, but
Something that didn't need a response.
So all traffic responses fall under rescue EMS. Is that correct?
Traffic accidents, yes, sir. Obviously, rescue EMS is the vast majority of the calls, as is typical in most fire departments across the country who do EMS related work. The other call types, as you can tell, are staying fairly flat or consistent across the last 5 years. I mean, there's been some little blips. The EMS calls, again, which is the largest, primarily during 2022. My guess is that was based primarily on COVID responses. And then it started to drop for 2023.
Feels really big. Are the actual fire calls somewhere in the 40 to 50 per year range?
Yes, sir. For 2023, there were 53 fire calls. 58 fire calls, 1,099 rescue calls, 58 hazardous condition, false alarms was 91. There were some other call types, but they were very minor, like severe weather, those kinds of
Total
things.
of 12, total of what, about 1250 or something like that?
The total was 1432.
Oh, yeah, 1200, okay.
And I'm going to kind of put in some of the recommendations as we go through these. Again, we're certainly not going to cover all the recommendations tonight. But again, some of the major ones. One of the things that we heard when we were here is that the fire authority responds to every EMS call that the EMS department goes to. And if that's what you want to do, and that's, you want to keep it that way, that's fine. From our experiences, fire doesn't necessarily need to run every single EMS call that EMS runs. If there's a legitimate reason, or there's a certain high priority call type that they're needed, that's typically what most fire departments do. They use a priority dispatch system. They'll be dispatched on trauma calls, motor vehicle accidents, cardiac arrests. You could even set it up where, let's say EMS is busy, and let's say there's a call in Georgetown, an EMS call in Georgetown, but the only EMS unit that's available is Idaho Springs. Okay, maybe fire goes on that because of close proximity. So one of the things that we put in the report is we recommend that you look to invest in an emergency medical dispatch protocol system. My guess would be Jeffcom has that. Do you know? They do? Okay. So if that's something you want to do where you could work that out between the fire authority and EMS, that could lessen some of the calls that the fire authority goes to. Nobody ever likes to hear, we want less calls, but sometimes for a combination system, particularly for the volunteer response, they can sometimes get burnt out on the large number of calls that they maybe don't feel they should be going on and or may have difficulty getting to. So again, if you could get to maybe a balance in between every call and no calls, that might be helpful. If Jeff Cobb doesn't have that type of system, from the vendors I talked to, you can get those for about 30,000, software and training and those kinds of things. Next slide is the fire station responses for the last 5 years. And again, since you can't read that probably, it goes Dumont, Idaho Springs, Empire, Georgetown, Floyd Hill, St. Mary's, Silver Plume, and York Gulch. Obviously, the biggest fire station responses, and these are calls that the fire station itself would respond to. It's not necessarily the jurisdiction. I've got another slide to show that, but it certainly shows Idaho Springs and Georgetown. Most of the calls, the vast majority of the calls are around those two stations, whether inside the jurisdiction or just outside in the ESD. Obviously, Dumont is high, but that's also because, one, the area they're running, but two, I think because that's where the paid crew is and they're responding from there, and they may go to other calls in those areas as well.
And the totals of all full calls here per year will be more than the totals of the calls that we saw before because you have multi-agency responses.
Yes, sir.
as well, where they're all in.
That was calls. This is responses. Typically, responses is going to be greater than the call.
One incident could generate 3 responses, 4 responses. however.
If there's a structure fire and you get the Dumont station, you get the Georgetown station and or the ladder truck from Idaho Springs, that's 3 or 4, responses to the same call.
So this data is generated off called GeoBox. Sorry. So I GeoBox the entire community. So for example, Idaho Springs, within the city limits of Idaho Springs, that's GeoBox. East ESD could be everything from York Gulch to top of Floyd Hill. So even if we've got response from all 7 stations going to this, the GeoBox stays the same. That's a set. That GeoBox is whatever it is, it doesn't change. So your call response data, if you run this data and correlate it to the number of calls for service here, they do correlate.
Oh, they do? Okay.
We do that because I'm trying to generate what's my call load by type by area by GeoBox.
Mhm.
That's why we do that.
Okay,
It cleans that up in the data fields. We've done that for 7, almost 8 years now. So I've got running data that shows what my need is by box.
So this is a location of the incident, basically.
Right, so like East ESD, for example, is actually one of the biggest boxes for response. That's everything from Highway 103 to the Evergreen Clear Creek line to
That's
top
when
of St. Mary's, top of York Gulch. It's that GeoBox, top of Trail Creek. It's
Not
probably the
hugely
biggest
populated
box.
though.
well, then the title on the slide's a little misleading because it leads me to believe it's all the responses from all the stations as opposed to where's the incident located.
Yeah,
So
and
that's what caused me to ask.
when you do the raw data within the report, it probably reflects it a lot better than the summary does, but
Okay,
that's the reason we do the data that way.
And the next slide is actually the actual location of the incident, right?
that's,
From what you said, between the ESD sections and the jurisdictional boundaries.
Yeah, these crossover.
Okay, so this is the actual jurisdictional location of incidents. Again, starting left to right, it's Idaho Springs, Empire, Georgetown, Silver Plume, West ESD, East ESD, and Central ESD. And again, I don't know all the parameters of the ESD districts, but again, the numbers across the top are, the percentage of the calls average over the last 5 years that were run in those areas. So basically the unincorporated area of the county typically accounts for 48% of the calls that the fire authority runs. Idaho Springs is 31%, Georgetown's 14.5%, and then Empire and Silver Plume. Is that correct?
No, that's exactly.
Okay.
So I have a question. Is there any further breakdown in, so you've got a location, we all know Idaho Springs and Georgetown have a lot of visitors. Do we ever break it down to, was this a resident call or whether it was a visitor call?
No, we don't break it down by where do you live, for example.
Okay.
I talked to the EMS director about that. His calls
Okay.
are about 50-50. 50% county residents, 50% travelers, out of towners. I wouldn't say the fire authority's numbers are going to be that. They would be close, but because they're running structures and addresses in the county, it's, and I don't want to, I'm probably saying probably 60-40.
Yeah, 60-40, just because EMS, when you look at EMS numbers, you pull in Loveland responses, which is a small percentage, it's reduced to that 50-50 mark. But we don't pull in those responses, so we've pulled to 60% resident, 40% visitor. I think if you got into the individual call detail, I don't know.
And hold that thought when we get into the financial piece, because that played into some of the financial piece. Okay. Any other questions on this slide?
Just a quick observation, correct me if I'm wrong. East, West, Central, ESD, is it safe to assume the vast majority of calls from all three of those regions are on I-70?
No. So Central ESD is a geo box basically from Lawson to Road and Bridge Shop. If you box that, that's your Central ESD. So all Mill Creek, for example. So Wild Wagon or Mill Creek, which has a high percentage of medical calls, falls in the Central ESD.
Okay, thanks.
The next slide is what's called a heat map showing the location of the fire authority's calls for 2022. The brighter and darker colors are where there's more calls than the lighter colors. Obviously, again, you can see Georgetown, Idaho Springs, a little bit in Empire, St. Mary's, Floyd Hill, but again, not anything compared to the other areas. Again, you can't see necessarily the bottom language, but I added this in here just to show the coverage of the fire stations relative to the county, and I'll read them for you. 85% of the structures in the county, obviously, when I talk about county or fire authority, I'm talking everything but the Evergreen District. So 85% of the structures are located within 5 miles of a fire station, which is the benchmark that the Insurance Services Organization uses for grading fire departments. 55% of those structures are located within 1.5 miles of a fire station. 77% of the incidents in 2022, 77% of the incidents are located within a 12-minute travel time from a fire station. And again, this is important when we get to the staffing piece, which Keith will go over in a second. 75% of the incidents are located within 8 minutes travel time from a fire station. And 78% of the incidents are located within 5 miles of a fire station. So to me, that shows that the fire stations are appropriately located to cover the structures and the call locations within the county. There's no gap areas where you've got 30% of the structures, covered, or whatever, 50%. You've got a high percentage of the structures covered within 5 miles of a fire station. You've got a relatively high percentage of the incidents covered within travel times of those fire stations.
Are those numbers drive miles or as you crow flies?
Those are road drive miles, yes, sir. The GIS analyst does that. Okay, now getting into the three main recommendations that we made. The first one being the financial stability. we looked at three options when we, again, went through all the data and sorted through everything. We could you could keep your current funding structure with millage rate, that's set by the ESD, and then the towns do their millage rates to fund the fire authority with whatever millage rate increases you need to fund future fire authority needs. Or the second option we looked at or considered was providing equal funding structure between the ESD and the cities and towns. Because currently, the cities and towns account for about 52% of the calls, but are contributing about 18%, I think it is, don't quote me on that, 18% of the funding for the fire authority. And obviously, the ESD has 48% of the calls and funds the vast majority of the fire authority. So we wanted to have as an option a more equal funding so that the cities and towns were paying roughly equal to what the ESD was paying, because that's how the call load broke down. And the last option we considered was a diversified funding approach where the first two options are based solely on millage rates and that funding structure. But we wanted to look at a diversified funding structure where it was a combination of millage rates plus a public safety sales tax, or whatever, however you want to call it. But some type of sales tax where you've got a diversified revenue stream. You're not dependent on property values. You've got the sales tax. You're also capturing revenue from those people who don't live in the county, but in fact utilize the services of the fire authority. So again, that was the third option we wanted to look at.
Question,
Yes, ma'am.
saying the largest amount is coming from ESD, what kind of consideration was given to recouping the costs of the ESD responses? For example, all of the interstate.
One of the recommendations we have in the report is for the fire authority to institute a billing program. They can only bill for non-EMS related responses, unless you wanted to do something under what EMS is doing and how EMS bills. I don't know, if that's practical or not, but I reached out to a vendor. There's several vendors in the country that do billing for fire departments. So car wrecks, hazmat spills, brush fires, fire type calls. Based on the volume of calls of non-EMS related calls that the fire authority runs, obviously these companies take their cut off the top. The net gain to the fire authority would be about $100,000 a year. So that is a recommendation to bill for service for fire calls. That's roughly $100,000 that the fire authority could gain.
Another question?
Yes, sir.
And that'd be billing to the insurance companies?
Yes, what that would involve is the one company that I talked to, the fire authority goes out on a fire call. They would collect the information from the property owner, the occupant of the vehicle, driver of the vehicle, whatever, about, address, their insurance company, all those kinds of things. They would come back to the station, put that in online to a system that company operates. That company would go out and bill those folks, or bill the insurance company for that. And they'd collect the money and then obviously send the cut to the fire authority. You can set it up however you want. You can bill do the insurance company first. And if they don't pay, say we're good. Or if they don't pay, then go after the homeowner or the resident or the traveler to recoup it, or do a balanced billing. If the insurance company pays, I don't know, $500 and you say your services are worth $700, get the other $200 from the resident or the homeowner. So you can set it up however you want to. Some do it, any number of different ways.
You have to find a service that will charge on top of, like, if you're asking for 700, you're only gonna get back.
Yeah, the company I talked to, their fee is 22%. So the fire authority would get 72% 78%.
And that's quite a bit more than you're getting now.
It wasn't zero.
Okay.
And certainly if call volume continues, particularly on the interstate or whatever, then that can increase.
On the medical billing piece, I'm trying to understand, I'm imagining a combined department being able to calculate the costs of the fire side of the service and include that in the bill.
You talking about if fire and EMS were combined?
Well, I'm talking about getting revenues from medical billing into the fire department.
Mhm.
Have you ever seen a scenario where separate agencies, like where EMS subcontracted to fire authority and included fire authority costs in the bill they send to their customers?
Yes, I've heard of it where fire, or it's called like a first response fee within the EMS bill. So, and I'm just throwing out a number. Let's say your EMS bill is $1,000 for transport. Okay, maybe 100 of that is considered a first response fee because the fire authority either gets there first, provides initial basic life support care, whatever that might be. They get that piece off of the billing system.
And who would pay for that piece? Would that generally be health insurance or automobile insurance?
Health insurance,
Health insurance. Wicked.
health insurance. And again,
Health
they,
Insurance being a little reluctant to pay for fire trucks.
I mean,
Yeah.
well,
It's a level of service provided, though. They're doing first response EMS until either in conjunction with or until ambulance gets there.
I mean,
It is medical treatment.
yeah, I mean, EMS billing today is not a money-making or even break-even
Right. I
operation.
understood that, but I
So-
was just thinking about what your question was, how it plays out. So,
And I didn't go too far into that subject because the company that I talked to on the fire billing piece doesn't do EMS billing. So that's all they do is fire billing. You may be able to, do you bill in-house or do you have a contractor?
We do.
Okay, there may be something that you could look at within, I don't know if Medicare would let you or the insurance companies. Is your payer mix mostly private insured or you have a lot of uninsured?
The vast majority is private insured.
Okay,
I know Genesee charged for engine responses on I-70 when Highlands was actually the rescue organization. So I think that has already been happening in the state.
Yeah.
okay.
And I think the standby, the road, blocking, those types of things, they're statute driven in Colorado. They're allowed under statute. You have to, I don't know about the medical billing piece. I know it's a practice that's being used for first response engine companies. It's typically what I'm familiar with is 10%. But I don't know if that's statute driven, but that's one of the things our research led us to is in Colorado, it's allowed under state law. It's 3 or 4 different categories.
Yes, sir.
Well, that would take quite a bit of the EMS supplemental back from Medicaid at the end of the year. That would take a lot of that money that EMS is currently getting back from the feds.
Would it?
They do not. They do not do any fire service. It's all EMS. So if it showed that it was EMS and fire, then EMS theoretically would have to bill more to make up for that amount. The feds wouldn't give us back in that 50%.
Yeah, there's a new bill I think it's been announced in the legislature this year to change the way that billing happens for EMS already, including, I think, 325% of the Medicare rates for insurance companies that don't have contracts with the agencies.
And Medicare is currently doing a nationwide survey of all EMS transport agencies regarding their operations. It's a multi-year thing. Have y'all done it yet, Aaron? Have y'all done the Medicare online survey stuff?
We were in the 3rd and 4th group, so we submitted May.
Okay, where they're just collecting information from every transport agency as far as their costs, how they bill, what their personnel costs are, their run volume and all that. The idea is supposedly so that they can set better, more accurate reimbursement rates. Being that it's a federal agency, that may yet to be seen, but they are doing that, and that's ongoing. Getting into the details on the financial piece with the current funding structure, again, how you're doing it today. We looked at, again, kind of 2 options there. and before I talk about this, all of these rates include all of the improvements and staffing additions and capital funding that we are recommending in the report. So these rates are including where we're trying to say you need to eventually be staffing wise and equipment wise, if that makes sense. That again, FY 25, you would increase the millage rate to 9.5. And then again in 27, you would increase it to 13.5. If you wanted to spread it out a little bit more, I put another year in there, and you could go 10.5 in the first year and then skip 2 years and then go to 13.5 in FY 28. And again, I can't thank Maria enough for her help on that.
Is
So
it driven by compliance with NFPA standards, or what was the target that you landed at the 13.5 mils? How'd you get there?
it was based on, we took the current budget of the fire authority, what their needs are, added in the existing or added in the future positions, staffing that we were saying, based on NFPA standards.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, and then the capital equipment piece that we're adding, and then saying, okay, where does the fire authority budget need to be in 4 or 5 years? Okay, and then we walk backwards to get to those rates.
And is there an FTE inflation built into that as well?
You
in
mean,
those years?
you mean salary increases?
Yeah. Right.
Yes, I built in the salary increases.
Escalating over those years, so the 28 number would be different than the 28 number cost would be different than 27 number cost.
Yes, sir. I built in the raises that typically the fire authority told me they normally give.
Yeah, okay.
And I just did, that's a 42% tax increase.
I know it's huge.
42%
Yeah. 4 divided by 9.5.
to 9.5.
Any other questions on this one? The second one was on the equal funding structure. Again, I know this is worse for everybody. We looked at, again, in FY 25, you'd increase the ESD millage to 7.5. The city town millage rate would go to 14.5. And then in 27, it'd go to 10.5, and then the towns would go to 18.5. The last one, the diversified funding, what we would recommend is in 25, you could go to a millage rate of 9, and then also initiate a 1 cent public safety sales tax. That would generate approximately $2.5 million. But some of that would go to Evergreen since it would be a countywide endeavor. So we estimated that the fire authority's take of that would be about 1.65. So millage rate going to 9, and then the 1.65 from a sales tax would get you where the fire authority would need to be budget wise.
Since the sales taxes are, although that's not entirely true, online sales tax. But since the sales tax collection points are, there are virtually none of those in the Evergreen Fire Protection District area. So when you say you're splitting the sales tax with the Evergreen Fire Protection District, virtually all the sales tax collection, other than online sales.
Okay.
Which is significant.
It was my understanding, talking with Maria, and again, I'm not trying to throw you under the bus or anything, but that Evergreen would receive a portion of that if you did it as a countywide sales tax.
Kind of like you did with Road and Bridge.
And you gave me a percentage. I don't remember what it was, but she gave me a percentage of what Evergreen's take would be.
Maria, can you tell us how you arrived at that?
Reviewing sales data and the location, jurisdiction codes and understanding sort of where the pockets of the sales tax where they're coming from. Like there's if you think about Idaho Springs along Main Street there's pockets of sales tax, right? It's not scientific. We'd have to dial it in even more, but I think it's close enough to understand it. Yeah.
And for those of you who have the report or who have seen the report, the detailed spreadsheets are in the back in the appendix. So if you want to see what it looks like every year, and we went it out through 2033. So these are good through 2033. The One of them. Just a second. The equal funding approach in FY 33 starts to go negative by $528, but other than that, everything else stays positive through 2033. That also as part of the financial piece, we are recommending that the go next slide.
I'm sorry.
Oh, you're fine. You're not sleeping. The fire authority initiate a capital equipment reserve fund. Currently, they don't. My understanding is they pay for their capital equipment typically out of either their annual budget or sometimes out of reserves. We're saying to start putting away money of $500,000 annually to fund fire station upgrades and improvements. Whether the Idaho Springs builds a brand new station or they renovate the existing station, to fund capital equipment purchases like breathing apparatus, thermal imaging cameras, to fund safety items for the stations, diesel exhaust systems. You could do personal protective equipment for the firefighters out of that, and also fire apparatus replacement. Currently, a fire pumper costs anywhere between $800,000 and $1.2 million. And your lead time to buy one, if you ordered it today, you're going to wait between 3 to 4 years before it shows up at your door. Due to the shortfalls and supply chain issues. We dealt with a fire department in Connecticut back in the summer who was looking at doing an apparatus replacement. And I reached out to them. They just bid out a heavy rescue unit, which Mr. Marshall know what a heavy rescue unit is, but it's basically a big box that carries rescue equipment, has no pump on it, no water, no tank, and no ladders. Their build time was 45 months for $1.475 million. So fire apparatus is expensive, and the apparatus, the frontline apparatus that the fire authority has is all still in pretty good shape. It's only 10 years old, be 11 years old this year. But even if you ordered something today, by the time the first unit got here, that apparatus would be 14 to 15 years old. Currently, under NFPA standards, they recommend that frontline apparatus that's more than 15 years old be moved to a reserve status. Apparatus that's more than 25 years old should be taken out of the fleet and replaced completely. Now, you've got to have a little bit of common sense based on call volume, road network, wear and tear, all that, and that's in the report as well. So I think, you can get more than 15 years out of your apparatus. I don't know whether you'll get 25 years out of it. You might, but on some of it, you might, but I don't know. But anyway, just from a planning perspective, the fire authority needs to start a long-term equipment replacement plan, whether it's, again, fire station stuff, breathing apparatus, fire apparatus itself, so that you can kind of project and use that money annually to purchase and fund those kinds of things. I don't know, because I tried to get a cost on a commercial rechassis like you told me you would probably do on those. But my guess is even a commercial rechassis, you're going to have supply chain issues. And I'm guessing a commercial rechassis would probably be at a minimum 500,000. That about right? Probably
Actually, probably just a rechassis is probably closer to
three.
because you're transferring the body, you're transferring the pump. So
Totally distracting.
Pump kit right now it's like 35 for a pump rebuild,
Okay,
PTO rebuild.
but still 3 times 11 engines. Again, we're saying start putting this together, putting this, down for future costs. If you were, again, I don't know where you are with this decision or if any decisions have been made, but if you were looking to truly build a brand new Idaho Springs fire station, you're probably looking at between $8 to $10 million for that facility. I talked to the chief in Silverthorne. They're building a 9,400 square foot building that's only two bay, I think. And it's about $8.5 to $9 million. So, you know, with what you would need for the apparatus you have there, that's a lot of money. So again, I think put in the report to consider, you should really kind of consider renovation of the station, if the bones are good in that station. So anyway, questions on the capital piece? Yes, sir.
So your observation is no matter how we close the gap, that we're, I would say, profoundly underfunded, right? Because you're talking about going from 4.5 mils to 9.5 to 13.5. That's actually almost 200%. Not the 42 is from 9.5.
To get you where we are recommending you be
Triple it.
for minimal effective staffing,
We
yes.
need to triple our current our current funding.
Revenue, yeah.
And again, you'll see where we're going with the staffing in a minute. Yes, sir.
Did you do any financial studies on per capita at all? What is it costing right now? Is it in there?
Yes,
Okay.
and the benchmark
Just wait till I-
departments as well.
We had a,
You are looking
per
for,
That's a
population,
former EMS director.
population.
what?
That's a
That's
former
okay, if it's
EMS
in there,
director.
I will-
I know who he is.
Okay, I was gonna say, that's why you know so much.
I'm just asking questions that I'm gonna.
Yeah,
ask
and just so you,
the municipality.
and just so you know, we benchmarked the jurisdictions that responded were Telluride, Carbondale, Crested Butte, and I think Pagosa is who we heard from. Telluride, if you look in the report, Telluride's millage rate is roughly equal to what y'all's is, but that's inaccurate because they just did a millage rate increase that takes effect this November, and they're doubling their millage from 4.5 to 9. Now, obviously, their value of a mill is a lot more than your mill, but they're doubling their mill value. Okay, that's all on the financial piece. Again, what we're saying, the next critical piece is the staffing. Keith's gonna take care of that.
Okay, so for those of you that have the report, we'll sort of reinforce it with this slide. The end goal, to save time, is that we believe that 10 personnel should be available on every 24/7 shift. And that ideally would be a combination of career and volunteer. Obviously, if the volunteers are not there, that number would have to be made up by career staff. And we think that should be at least a phased-in approach that should start within the next year or two. So staffing can be a little bit complex to understand, and so I'm going to go real slow, and please, let's ask questions. So there's staffing and there's safe staffing. Okay, firefighting is a complex business. Can one person put out a fire? Yes, if it's small enough. Complex, is that the safest way to do it? Typically, what we set ourselves up for is an incident of some magnitude where we're going to have to arrive, do multiple tasks, scene size up, pull hose lines, throw ladders, effect rescue, maintain incident command. There's a number of tasks that have to be done simultaneously. One person can't do that. Two people can't do that. Three people can't do that typically. So it takes a minimum complement of folks to get the job done safely. We want everyone to go home, okay? And sadly, in our country, we've studied national firefighting statistics of firefighter line of duty deaths. And, we unfortunately have a number of firefighters that die every year in the line of duty. Some of those are medical related, a good percentage of those are medical related, but another percentage are related to the hazards of the job, whether it be thermal assault, they burn up, they get exposure, or they get, they're involved in a collapse. So all these things we don't want to have happen at Clear Creek, okay? We want everybody that turns out to go home safely. That's really the end goal. So when it comes to nationally recognized safety standards, there are a bunch of them that are listed in the report, but I want to focus on two.
Do you want us to put the 1720 slide up there?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Or do you want to go to
Yeah,
the
I'm kind
slides?
of talking right now. Yeah, put that up there, please.
Next-
I'm gonna
yeah,
bounce
that
around a
one.
little bit with that. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That's okay.
I don't do scripts very well. So the National Fire Protection Association, NFPA, produces many different standards that are today considered best practices. NFPA standards are not laws unless they're fully adopted into codes of local jurisdiction, but they're considered best practices. So within the fire world of staffing, there are two that stand out: NFPA standard number 1710 and NFPA standard 1720. So the NFPA 1710 is primarily, for lack of a better term, developed for pretty much urban areas, okay, where you have a lot of buildup, you have a lot of responses, a lot of close-in buildings, a lot of dense population. New York City, Washington, DC, those jurisdictions that are pretty much all career departments fall under that standard. But 70% of our firefighters in the country are volunteers, okay? Roughly. So 70% of our departments. And so the NFPA and the technical committees that worked on this code had wisdom to look at, well, we're never going to meet those 1710 rigid standards, such as having 4 people on an engine around the clock, 2 engines arriving, or the second engine arriving within 240 seconds, the third one arriving, the first ladder truck, and so on, ultimately to get to about 17, 18, in some instances up to 30 people, depending on the type of building it's on fire. You're not going to get that in an environment such as Clear Creek. So what NFPA 1720 does is it looks at jurisdictions that may be more towards rural, that may have a heavy composition of volunteers, that may even have remote areas. Sound like Clear Creek, excuse me, does. So what we did is try to fit this organization into what we believe you would fall under 1720. And so if you look at the standard, it breaks it down into 4 primary areas that are time-driven by response. There's a 5th one, special risk. I'm not going to really talk about that because it's really not a fixed standard. So urban requirements, we do not believe apply to Clear Creek. You really don't have any urban buildup areas where you're talking about 1,000 people per square miles. Okay. Suburban areas, you're kind of with your downtown districts of Idaho Springs, Georgetown, where you have downtown business districts. Those districts are going to be a little bit more than what I would consider a rural or remote area. That's your little slice of suburban. And again, this is philosophy and opinion, so feel free. But we believe that your downtown areas warrant, and just think about it, one building, the next building burns, the next building burns, we have a conflagration. Okay, it's not going to happen out in remote where there's one building on it on 50 acres or whatever. So we do believe that the suburban area applies for part of your area. The rural areas are less population per square miles, and then the remote areas are travel distances greater than 8 miles. And we gave you some data earlier about how many structures are located outside and within those certain parameters. So how does this relate to staffing? And where did we come up with the number 10? So the minimum staff for a suburban area, and let's just play like, God forbid, that we have a call downtown Georgetown, the commercial taxpayer business is on fire, and it's a working fire. We think that you need 10 people to do that safely. NFPA thinks that. We think that is a marginally safe, minimal level of response for that type of a call. Now, we get a house fire out in the rural area, okay? The standard allows you to operate safely with less than 10 people. There's fewer tasks in terms of protecting exposures, maybe not pulling extra hose lines. You don't have to do that. So it recommends 6 people. And then for remote areas, it recommends a minimum of 4 people. Okay. So when we talk about your staffing today, there's a gap. Yes. Can you back up just a little bit?
Yeah, right there.
Now, so, and again, work with me, folks. A guaranteed response at the very minimum level today in Clear Creek would be 3 personnel. Because you have 2 career people on duty, and you generally speaking, as a minimum, have a minimum of 1 staff person, whether it be chief, assistant chief, or one of the career captains that's available, okay, that's available to respond. But worst case scenario, somebody's got a doctor's appointment and somebody's at training or whatever, out sick.
2 calls.
Mhm.
Or there's 2 calls.
So there's 2 calls. You got 3 people. So 3 people responding does not meet any of those recommended categories in NFPA 1720. When we go to, and again, the top one assumes there's no volunteers available. And we know you have volunteers. We just don't know how many and at what times they're available. You can have 100 volunteers, but if they're not available at that critical moment, only available nights and weekends, that's not helping you at 10 o'clock on Tuesday morning when you got a structure fire downtown in Georgetown. Okay. So it's not just quantity.
Just to give you some numbers, I'm sure they've changed a little bit from when we were here in August. But at the time of, and we were here in August, the fire authority had 55 volunteers. 40 lived outside of the county, 15 lived inside the county.
So the slide below talks about a marginal safe response. Now, just for a minute, the slide next to Chief Jones and Chief Badlam, just block those 3 individuals out for a second. We're going to pull them back in a minute. But a marginal safe response, this is what you're typically guaranteed from what we've learned. You're going to have 2 folks that are on duty. One of the captains is going to be able to respond, and either Chief Babion, Chief Jones, or both are going to respond. So it could be as many as 5 guaranteed. And if you add 3 volunteers in, now you have 8 folks, another volunteer, when we're recommending 2 volunteers per shift, which would give you really a total of 9 in this slide. Now we're getting closer to that number where you can safely say that the number of people, there's sufficient number of people to perform the myriad of tasks that have to be done simultaneously on a working structure fire. The standard for NFPA 1720 and 1710 is a wood frame residential building, 2,000 square feet. Okay, so that's sort of what they use as a barometer. You got big houses here, you got some small houses. But that's just where we land. So it's going to take some work to get you all up to a minimum level, whether it's be adding more volunteers, whether it's going to be adding more career staff. Again, recruiting volunteers and getting them trained up is just not going to happen overnight. Okay, so there's a process. So that's why we're saying, maybe do some things now, such as hiring to get maybe 6 more people in here right now. That would allow you, and I'm going to give the chiefs here kudos. Efforts are already underway to achieve one of these objectives in the report, and that 6 personnel are going to be hired March
1st.
So what that's going to do is it's going to allow, of course, it's the chief's discretion, but I think I know what he's going to do, to split the staffing from Dumont to put them at Georgetown and Idaho Springs, which makes perfect sense. That's where your call volume is. So we're starting on increasing that day-to-day minimum staffing number. Okay, so let's see.
Do you want the 5-year plan? Or
Yep, let's do that one.
Because then that can.
Does everybody understand the chart and how we got to those numbers? Okay.
It's page 66, I think, in your study.
And let me just say this, as I said, NFPA standards are not laws in and of themselves.
Yeah,
They're best
60.
practices. A lot of jurisdictions, a lot of localities say, what's NFPA? They're somewhere up in Massachusetts. Well, if you injure or kill a firefighter, there's going to be hell to pay. and I don't know how else to say it. CDC, NIOSH is probably going to come in and do a report, and there's going to be findings, and there's potential. There's not going to be OSHA penalties, I don't think, in Colorado. But OSHA may render a decision, but there may not be penalties, but civil liability then comes into play. I can guarantee you that there's tons of defense attorneys that are out there, then they know those NFPA standards pretty well. And there's lots of fire chiefs that are no longer fire chiefs, or in a couple of cases are in jail because of failure to adopt minimum standards. I'm not saying that to, scare you, but I'm just giving you what the reality is. And this is why we want to help protect you, and I know it's going to cost some money, but we think it's the best way to go. So we had put in 6 years. We're going to have a balanced program where first thing is you got to get your volunteers recruited. We don't exactly know how many volunteers you have. We don't exactly know what that number is per station. We don't exactly know how many volunteers show up on every call. We have some averages, but we can't pinpoint to say that everybody's got 2 volunteers at 10 o'clock in the morning on Tuesday. We don't know that. We don't think that's what it is, but we'd really like to know and be able to nail it down. So there ought to be a goal attached to your recruitment of volunteers. And the way to do that would be through a volunteer program manager, and that's available through the SAFER grant program, 100% funding for 4 years, 3 years. And again, it's a competitive process. It's a federal grant, but a lot of jurisdictions have decided to carve out somebody in their organization or hire somebody in the organization, do nothing but volunteer recruitment and retention. Okay. Now, if you don't have the SAFER grant, it could fall to somebody else. They don't necessarily have to be a firefighter. If you've got somebody in the community that's good in marketing or that understands how to get things done in the community, what a great asset. So that could be a volunteer administrative type person in the community, but you really do need to carve out somebody whose focus is on getting out in the community and getting volunteers recruited.
And preferably in county community volunteers.
Yes.
Out of county volunteers are great, but at 2 o'clock in the morning or 4 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon, if something really bad's happening, you can't wait all day.
And from what we discerned, you have more out of county volunteers than you do in county volunteers. Okay, so to me, that's a target rich environment inside your borders here. Okay, next one. This would be what I just spoke to, hiring 6 additional personnel, staff 2 people, 24/7 in Idaho Springs and Georgetown Fire Station. So that's already in the works. What that's going to do for your staffing is on a structure fire, hypothetically, instead of a minimum of 2 people going out on the fire trucks, you're going to have a minimum of 4. Okay. And there's another standard out there called 2 in and 2 out. And again, that says, unless it's an imminent rescue situation, you should have 2 people going inside that are in constant physical contact with verbal or physical contact with each other, and 2 people on the initial attack waiting outside, just in case there's a problem. That's your initial rescue crew. Okay, so whereas with 2 people responding and a potential delay, if admin staff is not able to get there, the potential exists with 2 engines responding. You could assemble 4 on the fire ground and do it safely, 2 in and 2 out. It's not going to work that way every time, but the potential is there. Okay, but kudos again, you're moving in that direction. Next.
You have to have someone to pump the truck too.
Yes.
So that's 5 total, right?
It is.
Unless one of those people outside is pumping, yeah.
Yeah, you can get away with it if there is an imminent life safety hazard where people have got to go in. I mean, the trucks will pump themselves for a little while.
If
I've
it was,
historically heard of it, I've never seen it.
What?
Going into a house and leaving the pump on 200 PSI and going in with it and watching it.
for the initial stages of the incident, you could
Yeah.
theoretically do it because
Pull
the
your
pump
pre-
operator is
pull
also
the
going to
pre-connect, charge
potentially
it to
be.
the-
I hear it. I'm just saying, I've never seen it.
Yeah, that might be why
But again,
EA 1710 says 6 in a rural area, right?
Yeah, they're,
Not 4.
Well, again, in the original presentation that we had sent to Mr. Bosshart, there was a draft. We put the 1710 graphic in there that shows the 16 to 18 people, and it shows people,
Yeah.
on the pump versus on the hand line versus whatever. But again, we try to inject a little bit of common sense into this as well. Again, if we're trying to help you guys be physically appropriate and conservative, we don't want to recommend too high of numbers.
I guess my response back to you, sir, would be if you're having two people, then that's only one person going in while the other person operates the pump.
No, I'm saying, my answer to that would be at least 3 people, right? Then you've got one crew and someone to run the truck, and hopefully 2 people show up to man the backup line.
That's where we're going to try and get you to. Yes,
And the
sir.
2
If
people,
I was the engineer, of course, I would go man the backup line, but that just seems like you're running pretty close to the
Right.
line.
the
That's
2
what you
people
work.
who are backup don't have to be standing there in a backup mode. They can be dressed in their protective equipment and ready to go and do other functions, as long as they are not that they don't get so preoccupied that they lose situational awareness of the incident.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, my point was, our problem could be even slightly worse than you're presenting it. You're giving us a little bit of an easy out by saying you really only have 4 people.
Well, that's just phase one.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have a question along those lines. The rural structure fire around here usually is in a forest. So have you addressed the potential wildfire issue?
Not specifically. We're just trying to stay within the confines of the building itself and the way the standard was built. Again, this is just getting the basic theory across to get to a minimum level of people.
I mean, we address some things relative to the fire authority currently has a part-time mitigation crew that they hire to do projects, May to November. So it is May to November, wildland mitigation projects, and they respond to wildfire incidents. We're recommending that they try to move that to be 12 months coverage to help with wildfire programs. We are recommending a more coordinated effort of wildland mitigation projects in the county. Because right now, I think it's changed a little bit from what Chief Jones just said, but each of the towns has their own community wildfire protection plan. The fire authority has one. There really ought to just be one wildfire protection plan that is managed by the fire authority, in our opinion, for what mitigation projects and where the risk areas are and all that. We recommend some new technology be considered for wildfire detection called Pano AI, that a lot of places in Colorado have gotten. I reached out to the company. There are actually 2 mountains in the county that have the Pano AI on them already. I don't know who owns them or what they're used for. But if there's a way that the fire authority could tap into them and be able to, most of the time, those cameras are linked, their cameras are linked to the company Pano AI. And when they get sense that there's a wildfire, then they notify the dispatch centers in that jurisdiction of the wildfire. But typically it's done way earlier than obviously when a lot of people can see it.
I hear 2 questions embedded in per question.
Sure.
The first one is what you were addressing, which is who takes care of mitigation and runs crews, and where does the extra manpower come from if everyone else is on standby, ready to respond to fires and responding to fires? And the second question is, how many people does it really take to address a structure fire when most of our structures outside of the towns are in usually heavily forested areas.
Right.
And so you're also having to protect against spread. It's like we worry about wildfires taking out houses. You also have to worry about houses taking out forests that spread to more houses.
Right.
And so to respond to a full structure fire that's in a heavily wooded area, you've got not only putting out the structure itself, but preventing that fire from spreading to the woods around it. And then when it's not that situation, we have 2 areas in the county where, and I imagine when you use your demographic your demographics to come up with different levels of requirement on that slide, a few slides back, and you had, like 1,000 plus.
What are you talking
And
about?
we have two areas of the county, Idaho Springs and Georgetown, where the Idaho Springs is approximately 0.4 square miles, the entire town, less than half a square mile, but it has about 2,000 people in it, 1,800 people in it, something like that, which comes out to 4,500 people per square mile. And when you go up to Georgetown, it's half the population and half the area. It's about 1 square mile. Or excuse me, about 2/10 of a square mile. It has about 1,900 to 1,000 people in it, something like that. And that's the same 4,500 people per square mile, but I'm imagining those demographics are to apply to a widespread area of suburban or urban density. Is that correct? Or is there any requirement that we have, any necessity that we have for those fire departments in those towns to be better staffed for that situation?
So if you put it in the context of NFPA 1720, and again, we're using a lot of ideal circumstances and kind of laboratory conditions, for lack of a better term. Certainly the wildland exposure from a structure fire is a hazard. One theory is if you get there quick enough and put the house fire out, you don't have a wildland because you've eliminated the source of that. Obviously more, particularly in rural remote areas, that's not always the reality. But 1720 allows you to assess, and it's that fifth line up there talks about special risks. So yeah, the locality, and that's up to the AHJ, the authority having jurisdiction, to discuss those matters. And we're simply trying to get you to a minimum based on that structure fire itself, in a 2,000 square foot wood frame building. Now, if you were to look at,
If you look at page 65 in the report, we have a rough example of other types of incidents and typical minimum staffing. We've got a brush fire, less than an acre and accessible. So obviously that may never happen here, or, it may be some of what you do have. We say a minimum of 9 people.
Okay.
Yeah, what I heard Rebecca's question was what Randy said, because Rebecca's my neighbor and lives above me, and if my house catches on fire during a red flag day, they're gonna be more concerned about the fire escaping my lot rather than saving my house.
Right,
And
Exactly.
No, absolutely.
Takes a lot of people.
Yeah.
So
Again,
every day you have at least one hose that's not gonna be involved with protecting the house. It's gonna be involved with.
I mean, a lot of it's going to depend on the weather conditions, the terrain. I mean,
Snow on the
these are the wildfire experts over here, not us. I mean, I will admit that. So, a lot of factors come into play.
So I think my take is you guys are doing great work, but I think it's worse than you're even telling us.
That's where I'm coming from. Is there are some additional needs that we have and see. It's kind of like I don't want to get too far down the rabbit hole, but our fire resistant building codes are based on 2 principles. Number one, protecting that house when there's a wildfire coming towards it, defensible space and all that stuff. That same defensible space and those same fire resistance exterior claddings are about keeping the fire from escaping from the house into the land around it as well.
I think one thing, and I'm going to jump ahead, but the fact that at least in the unincorporated areas, correct me, a house over 3,600 square feet is required to be fully sprinklered. 44, wrong jurisdiction.
There's plenty that are grandfathered, aren't there?
Still,
There's plenty of houses that are grandfathered.
It's new construction.
Right.
And it's been since 94,
96.
6.
So I think
but that's
suggesting there's a chance that it could be wildland response needs that would be higher than structure fire response needs. And so the NFPA analysis is moot because we should be looking at our wildland response capacity, calculating to that. Is that what you're saying, Sean?
I'm saying that the NFP is a good place to start when you're talking about minimum, but I think a practical standard that I would feel more comfortable targeting would be higher than that, because it would incorporate risks that we know about, such as the wildland exposure too.
And again, typically for right now, in season, you do have greater resources available with the mitigation crew. The Forest Service has a crew here, in addition to the career staffing within the fire authority and what we're recommending.
And again, some of our recommendation is designed to protect that downtown business district, which is your taxpayers. your tax base, excuse me.
It's also the most dangerous historic buildings that are made out of wood that are 100+ years old.
I mean, if there's a 100-acre wildland fire, there is a loss in the county. It may not be as great of a loss as if there's a 3-block fire in Idaho Springs.
Troublesome Creek versus the Marshall Fire.
Excuse me?
It's Troublesome Creek versus the Marshall Fire.
Right, yeah.
Okay.
So as we said, efforts are underway to do more or less phase one, hiring 6 people, and then utilizing volunteer support personnel at Dumont and to supplement staffing at Idaho Springs and Georgetown. And this, again, is that point where if you have enough volunteers where you can marry them up at Idaho Springs and Georgetown, now you've got potential of 3 or 4 folks that are able to respond out with that initial engine, which gives you a much safer response. But, I don't know what your ratio would be out here for every volunteer that you have staffed, how many you would need. It could be like 1 to 7, 1 to 5, because volunteers aren't available all the time. So if you need 2, you might need to recruit 10, is what I'm getting at. So the recruitment piece is vitally important. Recruitment and then training and then keeping. Okay, next little bullet. This is another staffing recommendation, and we think strongly that there should be a designated point, as a fire marshal hired primarily to do plans review and inspections. Again, you've got, particularly in your downtown areas, because your residential, your growth in general is not crazy right now. You're not getting 5,000 unit subdivisions coming in like some parts of the country, but you are getting some new development. But I think it's real important from a safety standpoint that you have a regular program of inspections and somebody designated to do that. Right now, it's a collateral duty with, I believe one of the captains has it primarily. And Chief Babion, you do the plans review as primarily. Not that this is not a competence question or any, this is just too much for one person to do. It should be a carved out separate responsibility. So we think that preserving and protecting your downtown business districts primarily through regular and routine fire inspections is a good way to start. But I can't speak to how regular inspections are being done now. I know there's goals, but I don't think they're all being met, and that's a resource issue.
Do we track data on the inspections we make?
Yeah, I track data on inspections. That's always been one of the hardest things to hit as far as how we increase the number of annual inspections. We have
416 or 61 or something like that.
Like 461 now, we split some, we have 461 commercial inspections required per year under the current, as we sit today. Which is, other than Evergreen, which is closest, that's almost triple what Foothills has, for example. They've got barely over 100 right now, talking most of the history. So the workload increases, and a lot of that is how do we get
The third inspections a day.
Well, when you consider the other collateral duties that are necessary, training, your public education, visiting schools, managing your smoke alarm program, those are all, right now, they're all collateral duties. Somebody else is, somebody's got 10 things on their plate. Okay. That's just, that point is going to become only marginally effective. So the second phase of the operational staffing would be to hire 6 more folks. And then what that would allow is a minimum of 3 people per shift. And again, looking at our option recommendation would just be to put them at Idaho Springs and Georgetown. That would give you 3. And if you had 3 at each station, get a volunteer or 2, now you're up to 4 or 5. Now you're beginning to get into that, where that number 10 that my first part of my presentation kind of gets into. You're at a much safer level of response to do those multitasks.
And we've got a slide to show that with the people again.
And then right now you have 2 career captains. They are typically admin in the office, assigned to the office with admin and operational responsibilities. You have two, but you have three shifts. So in the realm of supervision, you have a lieutenant on the fire truck and a firefighter. The lieutenant has got to be concerned with that incident and those initial actions going on, but they're also responsible for the bigger picture. And when a captain gets there, that captain is functioning more in an overall incident commander responsibility, looking at the big picture. We think it would be optimum to hire a third captain, assign one captain to each shift, and have them designated to run out of the office as the incident supervisor. That way your lieutenant can do the lieutenant's work, the firefighter can do the firefighter's work. If you get another firefighter, the two firefighters can do the firefighter work. You have initial supervision, that captain gets there quicker and on a more regular basis. Now you have somebody on the outside looking at the big picture. Again, safer staffing. Okay.
Also, again, one of the things that we felt is that right now, the organization is heavily dependent on Chief Babione and Chief Jones responding to be the incident commander. And that's not a bad thing, but it shouldn't necessarily be what you want always to happen, especially during the daytime hours or whatever it might be. So by having that third captain, you now have at least a captain that can go anytime, day or night, anywhere in the county to those calls.
I want to talk about the logistics.
Yeah, the last position we're recommending, and again, we phased this in over 6 years. I tried to be physically prudent or as good as we could with, phasing it in. The last position we've got is like a logistics equipment coordinator person. Somebody, again, when you're dealing with 9 fire stations and how many pieces of heavy fire apparatus? 40 heavy pieces of fire apparatus, at some point, again, those captains and the chiefs don't have the time to mess with repairs, getting them, if repair can't be done here, getting them down to West Metro for repairs or getting them to the dealer for repairs. You need somebody to coordinate that. The breathing apparatus, it's required that breathing apparatus, which is really the lifeline, firefighting lifeline, that be flow tested every year, and that everybody who is an interior firefighter who wears the mask, the face piece on the breathing apparatus, that get tested every year while it's on their face to make sure it's not leakage around there due to, their face changing, they lost weight, gained weight, whatever it is, that's required to be done every year as well. That's currently not being done. They're moving in that direction. But again, having somebody to help coordinate some of these programs from a safety perspective, but also from an equipment perspective. You want to skip the next slide and then go to the one after that? I figured that might help with.
Yeah, so this
where
sort of
we're going.
wraps it up in terms of, ultimately, 3 career personnel matched up with 3 volunteers. They could be at Dumont or, they could be part of the Idaho Springs crew. 3 career personnel at Georgetown. Now you've got 12 personnel on response. You've got full-time shift commander if you go to the captains. Without volunteers, you still have a minimum that allows you to meet that minimum threshold for rural and remote response. But that's, again, it says 12, we said 10. So that you see what we're getting at is these improvements can be done and can, allow you some flexibility so that at minimum, you're meeting that suburban response for the, God forbid, if it happens downtown somewhere on a major incident. So in perfect world, any questions on the staffing piece?
If you want to go back a slide, we did, again, cost it all out.
Yeah.
Considering, what a firefighter is going to cost in FY27 based on salary increases, all of that. And we put it together again, as far as the phased in approach total over the 5 years. Because again, we had the volunteer program manager in this current budget year. Since if you could try to get that grant funded or internally done, you're looking at an additional 1.3 million at the end of that 6-year period through FY 2029. That's in the report. Again, if you want to look at that in detail, I'm not going to go over the numbers unless somebody has a question about the numbers. The last area that we looked at was the structural governance for the fire authority. And again, we looked at 3 options. The first one was to remain as a fire authority, not changing anything. The second one is moving to a Title 32 special district. And the last one that we came up with and considered was moving to a countywide ESD. And that may be a misnomer. There may be a better wording for that. I don't know, but that's just what we came up with. We looked at the advantages and disadvantages of each. Talk to y'all, talk to other people. And so our recommendation is to go to the countywide ESD option as the structural governance. You go to the next slide. Yeah. In that model, the ESD board would be the policy and governance oversight to the chief and the department. There would be an advisory committee that's created that we're recommending, comprising of the towns in the city to provide representation and recommendations to the ESD board on the movement of the fire department. We're saying you should, if this is where you go, that the ESD board could delegate direct leadership oversight of the fire department. We called it the CCFA, probably wouldn't be called that at that point, but to the county manager. So the county manager could maintain day-to-day contact with the chief, provide some of that direction. Obviously, unless the commissioners want to take that on, I would see time-wise, that wouldn't be something that you wouldn't necessarily have. But that it could be an option within that model. And obviously would involve drafting a new IGA between the city and the towns and the county or the ESD. The main reason we looked at the countywide ESD option is we felt like that provided the most flexibility to the future of the organization. When you look at the staffing, when you look at the financial piece, it provides the most flexibility moving forward, in that if at some point you wanted to merge EMS with fire, that could happen and you could retain the county EMS sales tax per the county attorney. Likely retain. So again, if you do the fire authority, that can't happen. If you do Title 32, that can't happen. Also, the countywide ESD would allow you to initiate a public safety sales tax to get to that diversified funding stream for the fire department. Again, under Title 32 and the fire authority, you can't do that. And then would provide a board of directors with a countywide focus. One of the things that we heard with people who were advocating for the Title 32 special district is that, well, you'd have a specially elected board that would be representative of the county, all parts of the county. Well, you kind of have that already with them. So that's kind of why we made this recommendation, because if you stay with the fire authority, the only funding option you have, again, unless something's changed, is the millage process that you do now. You would never be able to diversify that funding stream, and you wouldn't be able to merge with EMS and maintain that EMS sales tax. Same thing with the Title 32. So again, the countywide ESD, we felt like gave the system and the future of the fire department the most flexibility to do it this way. Yes, sir.
Did you explore whether that public safety sales tax could be done underneath the current structure of the fire authority? It looks like you have 2 organizations formed by an intergovernmental agreement, no matter what you call it. Why couldn't the county still put that tax in and just give it to the current fire authority as an option?
I can answer that. The fire authority is.
Peter?
Yeah, it's me. I'm sorry. It's the county.
Okay.
Sorry about that. On screen. The fire authority is established under Title 29 of Colorado statutes. A fire authority created through intergovernmental agreement does not have sales tax authority. So the public safety sales tax would not be something that it could do. It can only receive funds. It cannot, from these entities that can have sales tax. It cannot itself have a public safety sales tax.
I understand that. I think my question's more, why can't the county
Schedule.
put together a public safety sales tax and give it to the fire authority under the intergovernmental agreement?
Right.
Not the fire authority for tax, the county raises the tax and gives it to the fire.
Because, I mean, my own thought candidly is that then the county would be the only entity providing that sales tax money. It doesn't matter whether it's public safety sales tax or ESD. None of the towns would be, or municipalities would be providing that.
Legislator.
Got a lot of side conversation.
Yeah, clearly.
I mean, I'm going to defer to the attorney on any of those kinds of questions.
I can't address the legal side of it, but on the logical side of it, to state that the county has the sales tax and therefore it's the county's money and the county is the only entity providing funds into it. That's not really true because the sales tax is derived from within the municipalities as well. So it's not like it's the county raised the money and the towns have to pay. It's still a sales tax that is paid primarily by visitors to the county. And which is derived from both unincorporated and incorporated portions of the county. Just from a logical standpoint, from a legal standpoint, I don't know the answers to the question, obviously.
Right. A Title 29 can only accept property tax revenue from another source. It is not entitled to have its own sales tax. Now, I'm not really sure how the county would just donate essentially this money to the fire authority the way it's structured. Because that's what it would essentially be. Title 29s are funded by property taxes from the governmental entities. Does that answer the question?
Is there a way to change the structure rather than 29 that makes that possible?
Well, I think that's what the consultant has been talking about, because you'd have to have a different type of organization. And I think that's what they're offering here as suggested alternatives. It wouldn't, you couldn't do that and it couldn't remain, and it would remain a Title 29 entity. It just doesn't have that ability to be funded that way.
What would the title of the entity be if it was under the countywide ESD?
Currently, that's formed under Title 30 of the statutes, and it's known as a general improvement district. Now they call it a public improvement district. And public improvement districts are specifically allowed to provide for fire suppression, fire infrastructure, things of that nature. And that's why the county formed its ESD, which is really short for ESGID, which is General Improvement District.
Any other questions on the governance?
I guess I'm just trying for clarity here. Are we talking, when we use the initials ESD, we are talking about the county and Board of Commissioners,
Yes,
correct? Okay.
yes. Okay. The last section I want to go through is just some of the other recommendations that we have in the report. Again, just to highlight some of them, a little bit more detail. Volunteer recruitment and retention efforts. Again, we've mentioned the program manager, that position. Again, looking at recruiting non-operational volunteer people to help with administrative work. You know, you could have a guy that's used to work on fire trucks and he's retired and he could do some of your mechanical work or website design or public information. No, I'm just kidding. You know, whatever, but just other people other than just people riding fire apparatus and going into fires to help with providing service in the department. look at improve and communicate the benefits of being a volunteer through some type of orientation booklet that you could give to new members. Okay, marketing of the program better, what volunteers are used for in the fire department. What are the benefits? Look at the Red Rocks students that they have that they're teaching now, really push to get them to try to become volunteers in the system as they're going through the program. Social media, trying to hit different target audiences. Another big one is having somebody, and again, the volunteer program manager can do this, tracking the volunteer applicants. When you get somebody comes in with an application, says, I want to be a volunteer, the last thing that you need to have happen is somebody takes it and it sits in their in basket for 2 weeks. Okay. And nobody ever calls them back, or nobody tells them anything about what's required. To have somebody who takes that application, works with that volunteer applicant, shepherds them through the program of orientation, training. This is, how you get your gear. These are the things you need to do moving forward. It makes the biggest thing that volunteers of any organization want to be is they want to feel wanted, needed, and used. And that's what you need to do with a volunteer program manager. Again, we've talked about the long-term capital facilities and equipment plan. I won't go into that anymore. And Keith will hit this slide here.
So in as much as we want every firefighter to go home from a working incident, we also want them to go home because of their physical and mental health and awareness. So there are a lot of safety and health recommendations in here. Number one killer of firefighters today is cancer. Cancer, cardiovascular, and now the sad thing we're seeing is suicides, mental health. They're the big ticket items. So when it comes to the medical health of your folks and dealing with the cancer and cardiovascular, one of the deficits we noticed is none of the stations are equipped with exhaust removal systems. Again, 30 years ago, we used to sit right where that exhaust came out of the fire truck, because you know what, on a cold night, that's where it was the warmest. It smelled kind of good too, but we know now how bad that is for us. Firefighters have a 9% when compared against the average population. Firefighters have a 9% greater chance of getting cancer and a 14% greater chance of dying from cancer when compared to the average population. So it's a sleeping giant that's been now raised and elevated to the highest level. It's one of the 7 key priorities of the United States Fire Administration's current program on the fire service. They're giving a lot of attention, but it's one of the 7 key recommendations along with firefighter mental health and wellness. We think that entry-level annual firefighter physicals should be done. Right now, it's our understanding that firefighters get an entry basic physical, but there are no ongoing physicals unless the person uses their insurance. Am I saying that right, chiefs? So the average physician,
And just to clarify, there are specific NFPA standards on
right?
what should be examined and looked at and tested for firefighter physicals.
There's a difference between an occupational physician and a physician. The regular physician is going to try and make you feel good. At the end of the day, you might lose 10 pounds or whatever. An occ therapist or an occ medical is going to look at blood gas. They're going to look at your history of exposures to hazardous materials. They're going to put you on a treadmill. They're going to wire you up to a 12 lead EKG. They're going to look at every possible way under the current standards, every possible avenue to see your health. And with that program, if there's a remediation required, there are ways to get remediation done so that the firefighter can be restored to proper health. Again, this is just not a job that anybody should do. You have to be in good physical condition. Station exhaust systems are now known carcinogens. Turnout gear that's left in the apparatus bays are absorbing the same level of apparatus exhaust, and it's cumulative. So Firefighters are exposed from the toxins of smoke and a fire, but they're also getting exposed from gear being contaminated in the station. So again, there's means to deal with that physical separation of turnout gear. I know that's a capital cost issue, but also the investment of exhaust systems to minimize that exposure.
Do we have any idea what that kind of a system costs?
With the diesel exhaust system?
Yeah, there's two types. There's filtration at the truck itself, and there's exhaust from the building. So the filtration systems that actually mount as a separate filter on the apparatus are probably $10,000 to $11,000 per unit. And it depends on the age of the apparatus, but most new apparatus is what's called EPA compliant. So the newer apparatus does not have a filter that has to be replaced. Older apparatus that has to be replaced if it's prior to the EPA standards, but the initial outlay is $10,000, $11,000. It's hard to assess.
The tube systems, where it hooks to the exhaust and it exhausts anywhere between 10 to 15, typically 10 to 15,000 per piece of apparatus.
It's roughly the same. And see, your stations are laid out different. So in the ladder system, there's one hose per bay. Okay, so if you got 6 bays, that's 6 hoses. If you got 4 bays, so it's station dependent.
It's about $50,000 to $100,000 per station.
Okay.
Per station?
Yeah. And then consideration for a department safety committee. I think it's always good for the fire chief to be advised and have folks, looking out and making those recommendations. And again, multifaceted approach. The firefighters need to understand they have a voice too in their own safety. And so having a safety committee is a good place to start, to give the fire chief good recommendations. Community risk reduction. There's a chart in here talks about your code enforcement. You have multiple jurisdictions and you have multiple versions of codes that are adopted in your jurisdiction. Some of you have 2018 ICC, some are operating under the 2015 ICCs. So the bigger chart is in the back, but just need to find this. But we
you're past it.
I'm past it.
Yeah.
Just as an example, I don't believe.
Page 75, 6.
Yeah, for example, the information we adopted, the county, Empire and Georgetown are still operating under the 2015 International Building Code, International Residential Code, and the International Fire Code. Other jurisdictions, Silver Plume, Idaho Springs, you've adopted the 2018s. We're in the 21 cycle now, and the cycle to start the 24 process is underway as of 2 weeks ago. Property Maintenance Code is not adopted throughout, and the Wildland Interface Code, the WUI code, is not adopted. So they're just, and there's others that are in here, and the bigger chart is in the back, but we think that having all jurisdictions under the same set of codes is probably the better way to go long-term.
And it would certainly help the fire chief or fire marshal or whoever's enforcing the code to be enforcing the same code instead of having to worry about the different versions.
Right now, the fire and life safety programs, you do a residential Knox box program, you do wildfire property risk assessments, you do community CPR training, Red Cross smoke detector programs, community evacuation, route planning. So all of these are great programs. Getting out into the community. Citizen CPR is a known lifesaver. That the citizen CPR gives that patient viability until the arrival of certified personnel, whether it be the first arriving ambulance or the first arriving fire truck. Okay, we want to keep that patient viable for at least I think the 10-minute threshold so it's very important. You need resources to do that because right now all these things are collateral resources. Now, could some of these things be done by administrative volunteers? If you got people in, sure. You might be able to fit some of these responsibilities, find someone to coordinate the smoke alarm program that's not an employee, but just an interested citizen. Again, just possibilities. And as we said, adopt the IWUE.
You done?
Think so.
Okay, I got a couple other minor bullets before we close up. Under the staffing piece, one of the recommendations that we did make in the staffing section is the fire authority could consider or could look at part-time firefighters, either for backfilling positions, or you could use it as a phased-in way that's less expensive to get your staffing numbers up. With being in the Denver metro area, you ought to have a huge pool of potential part-time folks that could come in and fill in as firefighters and be qualified, and obviously different pay rate. Long-term, I would not recommend building your staffing completely on that model for various reasons. One is when there's a large incident, those part-timers go back to their full-time positions and full-time jurisdictions. So you're left with nobody or limited people. And the second thing is a lot of times the organizations from where they come from have a different organizational culture than what you maybe want here. And so again, if you want to try to establish a good organizational culture here, there may be some culture clashes, and that's just some things I've seen. The other thing we did make comment to in the report is consolidation of fire and EMS. We also don't recommend it at this time. You've got, I think, the financial piece, the governance structure piece, the staffing pieces, I think have got to be addressed before that should be considered. We do give some potential ways to phase that in if you wanted to do that. And one of the things I'll say is there's got to be some open, honest discussions between fire and EMS and the players to whether that is doable or not. And the last thing I'll talk about is, in fact, communications. It was very obvious to us that there are communication issues, like I mentioned in the beginning, between the fire authority, the county, the jurisdictions, the county, EMS and fire. Again, there are a bunch of silos built up out there that need to be kind of brought down and have cross-table discussions. And I know Commissioner Wheelock mentioned that, everybody's got to say what they think and really bring that up. But that is something we mentioned in there as well, that there are some barriers that need to be brought down. Okay. And I'll leave this with you. The best way to predict the future is to create it, and you got a chance to create the future for the fire department, whatever you want it to be.
I have a question that is just for clarification purposes based on an answer that you gave Police Judge Kelsey a moment ago, and it seemed a little different than what I was hearing described earlier. It has to do with the governing structure of a countywide emergency ESD. Police Judge Kelsey said, does that mean that it would be a board that would be, the Board of County Commissioners would be the board of the ESD? And you said yes. And then previously, I thought you said that was one of the models that could be used, and there could also be an elected board or a board that it could be a board like we have now.
No, if I said that, I misspoke. My understanding, and Mr. Lickman can clarify, understanding with the countywide ESD model is that the ESD board would be the governing body for the fire department. For obviously,
ESD board could be, it could be a board of county commissioners, but it also could be an elected board.
I don't have any idea. I don't know.
No. The ESGID the Board of County Commissioners by statute is the board of a general improvement district or a public improvement district.
A countywide improvement district.
Yeah.
The elected board piece was for the Title 32.
Correct.
Mr. Chair, if I might be to clarify a little bit, I think they also recommended within that governance structure some kind of an
advisory committee for jurisdictions. Yes.
Jurisdictions that maybe have been.
Yes.
Okay.
Explain to me what an advisory committee is gonna do. They're gonna say, we don't think this, and the ESD says, oh, yeah, we do, and they're gonna go ahead with it.
I mean, one thing I could say is Planning Commission, Open Space Commission, those are all advisory boards that are already in place that you can talk to their members and see what their opinion is about how we listen to them.
I know exactly what you're talking about, but you know what I'm talking about.
There's a
question.
potential for that. I don't think I've seen it here in my time here.
Okay, I have a question. Early on, when we talked about all of this and started into this, we talked about the aging demographics. And we keep coming back to, we need to improve on volunteers. You only have so much of a local base, and when the age of that keeps rising, like you said, not everyone should be in firefighting. Then that puts us back into, we're not finding enough volunteers.
I think it's both. Yes, the aging demographic is there and the base that you have to draw from is getting smaller. Okay, but I don't think there's a lot of marketing and outreach
Okay,
to the current base.
to what you have to. do.
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
use a different method.
You have to start at the pre-high school, what we would call maybe a cadet or level 2, and maybe through open houses, they're allowed to come in as non-responding members, but they're able to visit the fire station and observe what goes along. They get to hang a little bit, right? So they develop that interest. Our experience is you've got to be able to get to them before they get that driver's license or those other interests start taking place. And that's a targeted effort that requires somebody, and I don't know the breakdown of demographics.
And again, the people who don't necessarily who can't necessarily do firefighting inside, okay, but they want to help, can be driver operators for tankers, for engines. You know, they drive and operate and they're outside and they run the pump and all of that. They don't necessarily have to be inside. So again, there's several different ways.
I believe we had a gentleman at Empire that was visiting with us, and he said he wouldn't mind just coming down and driving the truck. Well, that's a very important role that maybe they're not an interior firefighter, but 90% of success is showing up, right? You got to get the truck there, right? So
Bless his heart, his biggest challenge is he had to drop out of the physical firefighting because he was into an extreme temperature situation with a fire that affected his thermal control within his body, and they can't seem to figure out how to fix it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, he could help that way.
But there might be other single
I-
role type providers out there,
Right.
potential that
People
could
that
do
have
that.
skills
Again,
that you could use
tar-
other than
targeted
sending them
recruitment.
And again, a longer term benefit, potential benefit of a fire EMS merger is you're now adding additional folks who might be cross-trained who can do both.
I think the advantage, there may be ways that we could use people like that can be part of the department still as volunteers. I know the person, as you know, I know the person because he lives very close to me that you're referring to. And he's a highly experienced firefighter that's been really in the thick of the war and thick of the battle. That's how he got the condition that he has today, from being inside a building that was collapsing and on fire. And but he also knows a whole lot about what it's like to be inside that building, and he'd be an excellent person to have for support on the outside of the building, kept well away from the heat. But so that's an example. A lot of skill.
I think, Wendy, another answer to your question is, we've been talking in sort of black and white terms as either you're a career firefighter and you're paid and you get benefits, or you're a volunteer and you show up and God bless you. I've been texting with Sean Caffrey, who's the chief of Crested Butte Fire, asking him about his organization. He has 5 people on time at all times. So 5, I think, is a little bit of a magic number. But 23 full-time to get the 5 that are on scene at all times. 15 or 3 part-time, additional 15 part-time who are on per diem, and 12 volunteers. And I know East Grand has a program where if you're an active volunteer, they will give you a stipend to pay your health insurance. So I think there's a lot of creative ways of recruiting people who may not come for nothing or just for their enjoyment and self-satisfaction.
The fire authority today pays stipends for the duty crew folks who are staying by at the station.
About health insurance, talking about what he just said. I know with police officers, you have FPPA and they have to have their own specific type of what will be covered. Firefighters have the same situational needs and health challenges, will any insurance, health insurance allow John Q. Public to take that on and not lose their health insurance? Follow what I'm saying?
I don't know that I do. I don't know that any health insurance is gonna,
Are they different?
I don't know that they penalize you for what you do for your line of work, whether it's paid or
I
volunteer.
don't think they can.
Huh?
I don't think they can.
But so, I mean,
That's what I'm asking.
yeah,
But
but there can always be, again, there's dozens of different ways that you can do benefits for volunteer folks. You could give them a $200, I'm just throwing numbers out, a $200 stipend to pay their health insurance, or give them a reduction on their vehicle property tax, or the stipend for the duty crews. Again, you can do all kinds of different things. Some people pay per call, depending on how many calls you go to, you get, I'm just throwing $10, $15 a call that helps just kind of give you a little bit of gas money.
Evergreen does that.
So, a lot of it's got to be worked in around what's currently in place in, I would think, Colorado statutes, also within IRS, because there's a balance between the benefits that you provide volunteer personnel and then whether they're perceived as being full-time employees. So that, there's legal issues there.
I think one resource is the National Volunteer Fire Council, a national organization that is geared to, dealing with volunteer issues from recruitment and retention to benefits. It's a great organization. They're very active at the national level. And so I'm not sure how representation is, if there's any local rep or state rep at VFI or NVFC for Colorado, it'd be worth looking into.
Would you repeat what they're called again?
National Volunteer Fire Council, NVFC.
I think it's nvfc.org online when you're looking online.
We're members and we've got.
And I'm assuming Colorado probably has a state volunteer firefighters association, don't they?
Well.
Do they?
That's one of the issues, not as strong as it used to be.
Okay.
Apparently, the National Volunteer Fire Council is a resource. We've been involved with that for years, including on the recruitment side, so.
One thing I just want to throw at Crested View to our current 2024 budget revenue, the revenue is 1.6 million. Their revenue is 7.6 million, and they run 892 calls, which is 40% less than ours.
Which I think is pretty close to Evergreen's.
Evergreen's budget's 10,
They're 10 now.
a little over 10 million, but they run over 3,000 calls. And theirs also includes EMS, which Crested Buttes includes too, but ours
So for the
doesn't.
number of calls that they run, they have a lot of money. It's a basic point compared to us.
And you brought up something that's also in the report as a recommendation, and several of you asked this in the follow-up comments to the draft, which was, looking at having Evergreen take over Floyd Hill station or cover that whole area, whatever. Again, what I would recommend is really do a true automatic aid response program with Evergreen.
Right now.
Huh?
It is auto aid.
Yeah.
For all calls or just structure?
Auto aid,
Okay,
which actually is fixed issues on both sides of the fence.
okay. And what's the other district there? Is it Timberline that's right there too?
No, we,
There's another district right there.
Foothills is down the highway, but there's also an agreement with Evergreen that Foothills will cover
Okay,
Evergreen's primary if they're tied up, and then we connect up with them. So there are agreements in place, and we've got a couple more that we're working on right now with
Okay.
the master plan with that district.
and again, if you end up putting career staff at the Idaho Springs Station, that helps with better coverage towards Floyd Hill as well, and to covering those areas of the Evergreen District, again, part of the automatic aid program. Because I don't know what the
Housing stipends are pretty common too.
Yeah, housing stipends are common. Again, some of what you're already doing with having dormitory space in the fire stations and allowing people to live there, that's done. Because I don't know what Evergreen's typical response is up in the, near the Floyd Hill area. I know they got a station nearby, but I don't know what their typical volunteer response is,
I don't know either.
so.
Just some thoughts from me, kind of big picture takeaways from this report. what I read is that we're underprepared for a fire here in Clifford County. And I'm sleeping less better after having read this report than before. I see some recommendations for the existing fire department and its board. As a member of the fire board, and Wendy and John is here, and Mike Anderson, you're here. I think the board has taken very seriously the comments in the report about the current governance. The fact that we were unable to meet for months on end this year does not reflect well. I know our board has made a commitment to meet twice a month so that we can try to have more time to evaluate the recommendations that are in this and work on our operations.
You say our board, you talking about the fire board?
I'm talking about the fire authority board, yeah. And then obviously some recommendations are for the jurisdictions that make up the fire authority, right? Funding adequate staffing, right? What do we collectively perceive as adequate? Is it NFPA? Is it NFPA plus wildland? Like, that's a conversation that we need to have. What's the right tax structure in terms of, do we prefer property taxes, sales taxes, a mix? And then what's the right organizational structure? I think are the three big questions. And on those big questions for us, I don't know the right process to get us all to agree. I think a level of public engagement is going to be helpful. I don't know exactly what those steps look like, but that's kind of where my head is at as I think about how to triage this work. Lastly, I would just say that we've got to land this plane, right? Like we can't be sitting around 5 years from now having left this study on a shelf.
We have to figure it out this year.
And one of the things that I would also recommend to the department is if you don't want to necessarily say you're going to try to meet 1720 exactly, then you ought to try to identify what it is you do want to try to meet so you can start tracking that to see how good or bad you are. I don't mean bad, but how you're meeting or not meeting that standard. It may be that you want your response time from the time of dispatch to the time of the first unit arriving on scene is 10 minutes or 12 minutes or same day, and you want 5 people, you want 3 people, whatever it is, but maybe commit that to writing as a goal for the fire department to start tracking data on. Because one of the things that's in the report that's noted is the first arriving unit, the response time from the dispatch system is not an accurate picture currently of the response time because it's for the first arriving unit. That could be a police car, it could be an ambulance. No, that's
a police car.
Huh? Well, okay, it could be an ambulance. And it could
That
be,
is correct. It
or-
could be an ambulance or fire, whichever.
or it could be one of you guys.
Right.
So again, you're showing up
That's right.
first, response time stops, it's marked. The last time I looked in your vehicles, I don't think you carried much water or hose or ladders or.
No, that's exactly right. It's
Okay.
the first fire or EMS vehicle arrives, is
Yeah.
how the data gets pulled.
But engine response time is a little bit more of a typical standard, right?
Right, when
Yeah.
we pull. so we
First
pull in-
first arriving fire suppression unit.
It's how we pull that data. So if you do first responding unit, it does skew your data.
Right.
We pull turnout time by apparatus. And we pull response time average by apparatus. That way I get true data for that apparatus. And I don't have to sift.
Do you,
Uh,
and if you haven't done it, you probably ought to have that discussion with Jeffcom to see what you can get out of their system.
Chief, do you mark water on fire time too?
We used to, we haven't for the last 3 years, and I'll be honest,
Yeah.
it's a dispatch capacity issue.
Right.
So we quit time stamping things because they're already maxed.
So
With
again-
what they've got for workload, so we quit time stamping water and fire, control, all the stuff we used to timestamp.
Right.
Just because it wasn't making into the CAD report, so it's stamped on our paper.
And
reports,
it's
but
hard to
not in the
do.
Dispatch CAD sheets anymore.
It's hard to do, but again, it gives you a snapshot of how good you're
Oh,
doing or what
very much so.
improvements you need to make.
Completely agree.
Years ago, NFPA came out with a standard NFPA 1500, and it was a complete safety standard. And at the time, probably only a handful of departments in the country that could meet it. And everybody's sitting back saying, we can't do this. 4 people on an engine, these response times, physicals, all this other stuff. And, kind of the remedy was Nobody wanted to get sued. But like Frank has indicated, you put together a plan, right? And then, okay, in 5 years, we're gonna be here, in 6, you graduated out and you have benchmarks and you have measures. And that's what's gonna make you better in the long run, but that's what's also gonna keep you out of legal trouble, God forbid, if something were bad to happen. So, you might not be able to do it, but do something.
Show what you're working toward.
Exactly.
Yep.
I think it'd be good to get the response from the different communities to, and George laid out the big picture, the components. I mean, we saw a lot of slides and we heard a lot of stuff tonight. We've had a lot of conversation. But primarily what we know is that we're inadequately covered at this time physically. And that we need more physical coverage. And that drives, and that's going to define what coverage we can agree to that is the standard that we feel we must achieve in order to feel safe when we go to bed at night, that we're safe, and also feel like as people who are representing our communities, we have done the best we can to make what at least the minimum standard of decide what that minimum standard is that we're obligated to provide, that we're not providing today. That drives then the revenue side, and then there's that mix of taxes deciding what the revenues are. And then once we decide what the revenues are, then that will define what the governing structure has to be, really. Because if it needs to be a mix of sales tax and property tax as an example to get there, if sales tax is going to have to be involved, then we have to start making sure that we've developed a relationship of trust that allows us to be able to achieve that governing structure and write some bylaws, write some rules, write some understanding to that governing structure and that advisory board, and have a relationship of trust in which we know we all came here for the same purpose. There isn't a dirty, evil, rotten board of county commissioners. It's just out to do everybody else in, nor did anybody in any of the towns come here to do that. We all came here to represent, protect the community, all of us. And if legally we have to do something like an ESD that requires this to be a board with an advisory board, that certainly wasn't my call. I mean, I didn't ask these guys or Peter or anybody else to come out and say, hey, can you put me in charge of this thing? Which I wouldn't be in another year anyway. But if it turns out that's the only way to achieve safety for the community, then we have to make sure we've developed a relationship and trust of understanding of how we communicate, how we receive information and process information. We have to have some kind of level of understanding that everybody knows that we found a good way to do the right thing for the community. But those three components, what do we have to do? What's it cost to do it? And how can we fund it? And therefore, what governing structure is required, whether we like it or not, so I don't know it seems to me that's the order. What do we think we need to do among the recommendations of how many people we need on board by what year? It sounds like what we need is the 2028 model today.
Well, I mean,
But you're giving us a little bit of a glide path into
well, again, going back to our priorities, I think you got to fix the financial picture first, because otherwise you're going to bleed to death before you can figure the governance structure and the staffing piece out, in my opinion.
But that funding structure though needs to be what that funding piece. I mean, we can't just like throw a dart, close our eyes and throw a dart at the wall. What we really need to do is have a target for the future of what we think. And so that is driven by what we think we need for staffing.
Well, that's true.
And that's all I'm getting.
No, that's true, because obviously if you do less than what we recommended, then
we got to do it all over again and then do it all over again.
No, but you'll come up with different numbers to get to what you need to fund the budget.
It'd be surprising if the numbers were less, just based on, again, what I saw from Crescent Butte and what I saw from Evergreen.
And I'll go ahead and put this on the table too. Nobody sitting in this room or connected with Clear Creek County told us, recommended, suggested to us a countywide ESD. That was solely our work team's product. So I'll just put that out there that, that was never brought up to us as a recommendation or where we ought to head. That was our product.
I have one more question, but before I ask, we haven't heard from you, Mayor, from Idaho Springs, or Andy. Do you guys have any questions for our consultants?
Well, first of all, I thought the study was absolutely outstanding. Certainly didn't tell us everything we wanted to hear, but we needed to hear it. I wanted to touch on something that George just brought up, and it's not in the study, but this public engagement, I think, is going to be so critical because I'm ballparking here. But within about the next 6 years, we're going to have to triple what we've been, our contribution has been. And
Or another.
I think a lot of folks that live here in the community would really be shocked. We're not talking about 40 or 50%. We're talking essentially about triple to where we need to be.
300.
But I think, this study lays out why. It isn't just willy-nilly. It really is kind of getting us to bare minimums. And frankly, I think all of us has seen us dodge a bunch of bullets, where we could have had a wind-driven event, and been the next Maui or something, we've just got very, very lucky. So, if you want to feel secure, George said, maybe sleep well at night. I mean, I'm afraid we're going to have to do a lot of public engagement to get the public on the side of providing the money. However, we arrive at that money, but we're going to have to get them on board.
I would agree. I mean, you've got to say, this is where we are now. This is what you're getting or not getting. This is where we think it needs to be. And we've had a consultant sort of tell us this, or this is what they told us, but we think we can get by with this. And this is what it's going to take to get there.
Engaging the public is absolutely critical. There's a caveat, though. You have to be careful that it's kind of like ordering a pizza. Okay, when you order a pizza, what do you want? You want it now? You want it to be hot and good. You ask the average citizen, well, what are you looking for from your fire? Well, if I have a fire, I want them to show up. I want them to do their job right now. Okay, so you have to go through that educational piece that says, this is realistic. This is where we are. This is what this means, just like you said, build it out for them. Because otherwise, asking the question the wrong way is not going to get you the answers that you need.
Again, this is a very small sample size. But if you look on page 115, we asked the question in the external survey of, as a citizen of the community, would you be willing to support additional funding allocated to the fire authority in order to hire additional personnel? Overwhelmingly, it was yes. So again, very small sample size, but
I think the public engagement piece is critical, but I mean, to start with, it's completely obvious because you gotta pass these things. We got Tabor, you gotta pass these things through ballot measures, whatever they are. And so the public has to be engaged and has to be sold. It's also up to us, though, to look at the calculus of the information you gave us and decide what the piece is that we want to take to the public, those other pieces. What is the service that we recommend? I think if you give a shopping list of services to the public, you could end up in a big bowl of spaghetti, trying to figure this thing out. I think we need to simplify it. We need to use our leadership judgment, understand what it is that it'll take to keep the community safe, and then engage the public in a manner and communicate with them in a manner that will help them understand that need and that piece, rather than 15 different options to the public and say which vote for the one you want for.
Right.
None of, and you don't convince anybody of anything. I think keeping it simple and then engaging the public with something that is very, very compelling is key, which starts with us figuring out what that is. What does it look like? What does the package look like that we need to take to the public?
Thanks, Randy. Mayor, any other questions that you have, comments? Sorry.
I would just like to say that I don't disagree with anything you've said on the funding, but I think it also needs to be worked at. For example, using Empire, we don't have the capacity to contribute what Idaho Springs can.
Understood.
And I mean, I can give up every other service I have within my town and not be able to meet those.
We understand.
That's what terrifies me. I don't know how else to say it.
Thank you, Brian.
Yeah, hey, Peter, quick question for you. How are you? Am I paraphrasing? Is it safe to say the only way that we could get a sales tax and money from the people that are going through this county is to restructure the fire department differently.
Yes. And I think I froze, but the answer was yes. I think that's the fairest thing to do. I think it would be very problematic to try and devote sales tax to the fire authority in its current composition.
John,
My only concern is the county's budget's upside down. Are we gonna take on another service and still make budget? That's my.
I think that's a great concern. I think to the consultant's recommendation, we would have to identify a funding source and have the people agree with it. No matter how this goes, I think that's what's gonna have to happen.
No, we still have the problem.
What's that?
So we're making a mark towards solving that problem.
Yeah,
It's still fair.
Andy, you're have a fire background. Do you have any observations or questions for the consultants?
Well, I think we're taking some steps right now to reallocate staffing. And I think that's a very positive step to get the staffing reallocated from Dumont to the where the calls are, where the bulk of the calls are, the population, the highest risks, at least from density, from older housing stock, life safety. Certainly was brought up earlier, you got the whole wildfire interface issue and throughout the county, and that's a difficult. How do you provide protection to the rest of the county adequately? There's a certain amount of assumed risk when you're out, on the hilltop. So I'm very encouraged that we're taking some positive steps already to address the situation we have with the resources we have. 2 in, 2 out is law. I mean, that is, you see that principle with confined space rescue, you see it with trench rescue. You need to have people not only in a hazardous environment, but you need to have people ready to respond outside. So really 2 in, 2 out is something, that's our first step, I think, is to try to make sure that we can get enough people assembled to putting the standards aside that getting people assembled to at least provide that. So you have that safety when you have people that are interior. So I know it wasn't the scope of this study, but I really think we have limited resources here, and we have declining revenues from property tax. We've been fortunate with sales tax, that's been doing well, but we've been asking more and more of our sales tax recently. Ambulance got a part of a countywide sales tax, road and bridge got 1% sales tax. There's a share back to the municipalities, which is a good thing. That's helpful. But, we look at our sales tax and how high, it's getting, and that can be problematic. So it's a complicated situation. We've had some savings with contract, with our dispatch. And I think that's huge, at least in Idaho Springs. Mayor and council chose to reallocate some of that savings to put towards some funding for staffing in Idaho Springs, firefighter staffing. The other thing that wasn't part of the scope of the study is the ambulance staffing that we have now, the EMS staffing. And I know that was part of a previous study, but I really think that we need to take another look as we look at all the other solutions and how much money it would be to hire all these, additional firefighters. We need to look at, can we make better use of some of the resources we have now in public safety with EMS? And I don't think that necessarily needs to be a wholesale consolidation, but I do think we need to look at, okay, when we have those 50 fires a year, or when we have those 20 fires that require all hands on deck, what can we do to handle that situation short of having, a staffing level countywide that's only needed on occasion? You need to always be prepared. We always have that tension in public safety is how do you have an adequate number of staffing? How do you afford it and you know, for those low frequency, high risk incidents? So I still think personally that's an area that we should look at. I mean, we have, you know, fortunately on the EMS side, we have a staff medic unit in Idaho Springs. We have one in Georgetown. I think there's one in Central County often. And when the incident is fire, I think we need to find a way, how can we make better use of those personnel, make a quick attack? And yes, you won't have the EMS or the EMS will be tied up, but we are fortunate to have other EMS resources. We had a MCI and mass casualty incident in Idaho Springs with 13 people transported, and we relied on Gilpin County, Jefferson County units. I think even Summit County helped us with backfill. So I mean, that doesn't happen very often. When it happens, you know, it's all hands on deck. So those are just a few of my thoughts, and I know I don't want to get outside the scope of the study, but and I know you touched on it in your study too.
Yeah, we did make some.
But I still think there's things we can do short of a wholesale consolidation or merging fire and EMS. How can we better use the resources we have?
Thanks. Rick from Georgetown, do
Right.
you have anything to add or any questions or observations?
I appreciate you guys doing the study. I know that it took a lot of time to meet with all these groups and to try to consolidate some things. I mean, Georgetown definitely doesn't have the funding that Idaho Springs does. We're trying the best we can. We're gonna do increments, three opportunities to try to pay into, bring in some firefighters into Georgetown. And so I think that's something that we can do. I think Georgetown probably has concerns about the governance moving towards a EDS or whatever it's called. ESD. In fact, I mean, I'd just be curious to see on a show of hands, how many other people have concerns? I'm not saying it's negative or positive, but concerns.
Oh, I have concerns.
So I think there are others in the room that we would say, we're not there. Even in our discussions, I think we'd have to have a lot more. I mean, like tonight, there's no way we're gonna make a decision on this. But I do think if it, I've learned a principle a long time ago. There's expectations. If they're not communicated, it leads to frustrations. And those are things that we don't want to be in those situations. So I think it's going to take us moving together to talk about it. What are our needs and how can we get there? Trust. I think there's a trust thing that we're going to have to work through. And I think that it's across the board. You know, all of us are going to have to figure out how do we trust. I mean, we have a system that we all like and where we're used to that. And anytime you change, it's always going to be uncomfortable to trust change, the new change. So I'm just speaking through my involvement with this, my involvement with my board, because I'm a representative too, and I have to go back to my board and try to build trust with this. And I would just say we need more time and we need more connections between each other, and we may not get there. That's the problem. We may not get there. However, I think we can move towards that to figure out how do we do the funding, because I think we're all hearing the same thing, is that we gotta figure a way to do this. At the same time, the burden on the sales tax makes me cringe. I mean, we're already there. How much further can we go before it breaks? And then we lose people because they're like, I'm out of here. So those are just my thoughts as I've thought through it.
I appreciate that. Rich, what are your thoughts? What are your questions, if any?
I just appreciate all the data and the time that you guys put together, because I can speak more fluently on what the issues are. I appreciate the chiefs coming in and I was really surprised on how much that you guys are doing data-driven outcomes and using that everything from mileage on your vehicles to staffing. I was really impressed with that. And I think Rick touched on it. I think there's a trust issue countywide, and that is a very tough thing to get back in the box.
Anything else?
I
Well,
do.
anyway, save them for last.
I just want to speak just really quick because you inspired some thoughts in me, Rick. I would raise my hand for, are you concerned by any of the three proposed governance structures? The current fire authority board is guilty as charged of poor governance. We've embraced trying to do better, but we've proven that we're capable of having poor governance. A Title 32 board, special districts around Clear Creek County have proven that they are not always able to govern themselves well. And there's only property taxation. So I don't think any of these models is perfect. And so I just wanted to, because I raised my hand for one, so I just want to also be raising my hand for a Title 32 and also be raising my hand for our current structure.
Yeah, I agree with that. Anyone in the back of the room have any observations or that they want to share or questions before I move on to Kelly and Jeremy? Okay, thanks. Before I turn it over to you guys for your comments and questions, I just want to say thank you. I honestly didn't know to what degree you guys were standing in the gap with such little resources and doing so many different things for the community. And I don't think I've ever really publicly acknowledged that and said thank you, but thank you for doing that. And I think a lot of this effort is making sure that you guys have the resources so that you can provide the right coverage and keep everyone safe. So thanks again. And Kelly, I'll turn it over to you. What are your comments or your questions for our consultants or for us?
Well, as you all know, I don't speak very well in public, so. I think this reinforces what we've been trying to communicate for the past 6 years. We need money. And we need people. And the change in demographics of our community we used to have a very strong volunteer base. And I think COVID was probably the biggest problem for us, and it really changed up how things work. And there's no housing for the typical person that would volunteer to be a firefighter. So that's hit us hard, and adjusting to that has been difficult. We've got a lot going on that we need to share with everybody and communicate and have meetings and talk about, so you know how we're adjusting to what we're confronted with. Starting next Wednesday, we're going to have a monthly fire authority work session. And then we're moving our board meeting to the third Wednesday. So we're adjusting to that. And I would say that, to keep my time short, I'm going to request a work session with each of the parties to the agreement, the individual town boards and the ESD board. And then we need to all sit together, the parties, and discuss all of the stuff that's been brought up and how are we going to address those, because the money's going to be a very, very difficult problem to address. Currently with the Colorado State Fire Chiefs Association, with the current property tax increase issue, they are working on different ways to allow fire districts to do taxing that's not currently allowed by statute. So there's some work going on at the state level that we will keep track of and get involved in. But yeah, we have a lot of work to do.
Did I hear your?
And we knew that.
Your primary recommendation for next step is that you want to meet with each one of the parties individually, the parties to the to the organization, and then have us come back together. That's the next step. Matt, is that what I heard?
Yes,
Thank you.
How long do you?
or we could start as one big group and go out from there too. Either way, we need to have dialogue face to face and
Right.
and talk about where we're at and how to get where we need to go.
I think there's really, in my mind, kind of two big deadlines, right? One of them is a deadline to put something on the ballot. And the other one is the IGA, which expires at the end of this year.
I would, at this point, from my viewpoint, I would ask that we do the automatic renewal of the IGA for that 2-year period to give us time to have discussions and work on all of this. We can't do IGA negotiations at the same time without having a good, clear path of where we need to go. And, already we should be talking about the IGA, but we have a lot here to talk about that we really need to get our hands on. And I think the ballot question to do an increase on the ESD budget is important, and we need to get a handle on that. So maybe that should be the first meeting that I request, is a meeting with the ESD Board of Directors to have a discussion on that. That's your decision to allow that ballot question. And
That's, I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you. Sorry.
And I'm sorry, I have a head cold issue going on, so my hearing is really off tonight. But I'll turn it over to my workhorse. He gets most of the work done.
Actually, you had a thought first? Just sort of that process that you're laying out assumes we're sticking with the fire authority model. So I just want to observe that.
Signing of an IGA.
Yeah, and the ESD board putting a tax increase on the ballot, and there's, anyway, because it could be a Title 32 going on the ballot. Right?
That could be,
That's not what I heard. I didn't hear that.
any change that we make from the current makeup is going to take time. A Title 32 to get that process done would be 4 to 5 years. You could go directly back to a ESD, which we were under 25 years ago. And that should take a lot of discussion, because that model didn't work very well at that time. Things obviously could have changed in all directions, but considering the financial aspect of this, I think staying in the current fire authority model for at least that 2-year period that's in the IGA gives us time to really focus on how we're going to find the money.
I heard something slightly different. I mean, to me, I look at the IGA as something like a memorandum of understanding or anything else. It's a living document that can be terminated upon the achievement of something else. I don't hear that we're not looking at a countywide ESD or Title 32 or anything else. I hear that we're talking about this IGA thing that's almost been held out there like a poker chip, and maybe the first step in achieving trust is to remove that poker chip from the table, so we're not playing poker. And the IGA goes away if we achieve that better, when we achieve that better model. I don't think it presumes that we're making the decision and pre-decides for us that we're sticking with the existing model. I don't think it does. It just says, this is the model we got. Until we got something else, it's the model we got. So we need to have some stability to it until that point, which we terminate. And our goal would be that during this year, if it's a different model, that we achieve that goal within this year, and it becomes a moot point, down the road, and we do away with the IGA because we got a different model in. Anyway, that's how I was reading it. I was coming from a point of.
I agree with that. And I personally feel that we should approach this with a significant sense of urgency. And that's not to rush anything through, but we have just spent a bunch of money. We've learned a bunch of interesting things. We're all focused on this. So my preference is going to be to schedule another meeting probably within a month or maybe 6 weeks, and keep meeting, do work in between our meetings, and see if we can drive this to some sort of a consensus sometime over the summer, and giving us plenty of time to have options for us. Because it's, I mean, part of it is feel a little bit of a sense of personal responsibility, I feel, because I'm gone, as everyone knows, in
Yeah.
January. And I've been working on this alongside of everyone else for pretty much my entire 2 terms. And if we're still talking about this in 4 years, I will feel very ashamed personally.
Yeah, and my statement previously wasn't taking anything away from that sense of urgency. I'd like to see it done before I'm out of here too, one way or the other. I just, whatever the time it takes, if it ends up taking longer to get it completed and moved to that new model, takes beyond the end of the year, we need something in place to operate beyond the end of the year. And that's the only reason I bring up just stopping arguing about the IGA so we can focus on other stuff, you know? That's the only reason I thought of that. But we don't have to, I'm not saying we have to change, you know, I'm not saying we have to finalize the IGA next month or something like that, so we can talk about those other things. We should be doing both. And at the point that we get some kind of a feel, we just, you know, we have to continue the existing structure until we have another one in place. In the meantime, we should go as fast as we can towards finding whatever structure is best, whether it's the current structure or something else. My gut feeling is that it has to be something else, because we need something that allows us to be able to tax sufficiently, probably on multiple levels, in order to not burden any one of them unbelievably, which to try to put it all on property tax or all on sales tax right now is, you know, going to be a real cannon shot at either one of those.
I said I was going to ask one more question, and Andy kind of asked it for me, but Evergreen back in the day was Evergreen Volunteer Ambulance and Evergreen Volunteer Fire Department. Crested Butte was the same way. A lot of agencies were the same way, and I don't see that many agencies in the state. And looking at the graph you had of fire responses, where the vast majority of them was EMS, there's obviously tremendous overlap between EMS operation and the fire operation. What do you see out in the places that you consult to in terms of kind of the path of evolution? Do you see this eventually probably leading towards a consolidated operation, whether it's fire-based EMS or?
I'll let Keith answer, but my opinion is yes, that's typically where it ends up.
That's been my experience in my career.
Yeah.
Where I live now, fire districts are separate, unique, tribes.
Yeah.
And there's a countywide EMS system. Because it almost models this.
Because you get the economies of scale that Mr. Marsh is bringing up of people, you've got a pool of people here and a pool of people here that sort of kind of do the same thing, not all the time, but sometimes. If you can help with training and skill development, then they can kind of all do
like different chain of commands, different.
Well,
different everything.
Yeah, our experience, and you know, Andy, same thing you saw in Maryland. I mean, it was dual role, fire and EMS.
But I mean, I've also been in a system in Florida that EMS was a separate county department, and then fire was a separate county department as well, and they worked fine. Again, I think there was some economies of scale that can be improved by maybe not a complete merger, but a partial merger or some assimilation, is not the right word. You know how you got the circles and they overlap some, you know, the level of overlap.
Diagram.
Give you an example. Today in EMS, unless something's changed, they pay folks overtime when they work more than 40 hours, correct? If you have people certified as firefighter EMS folks, and you kind of rotate them between fire apparatus and EMS vehicles, they can work up to 53 hours a week before you pay overtime.
They make more though.
They make more, but you have a higher threshold for overtime, like, what do you're 48.96?
Similar, not exactly, but sure.
How many people does it take to staff an ambulance?
Two.
No, okay, how many total people? 6 or
On duty in the system right now,
6 or 8?
6.
Okay.
Shifts.
Some places it's 8 if they work 12-hour shifts and all that. You know, that's a benefit if you're using 8 to staff that ambulance with EMS only folks. If you go fire EMS kind of mix, you can do that at 6 because you're working the 24/48 work schedule.
And just to say it out loud, I wasn't asking that question because I think we need to merge those departments. I was pointing out that whatever options that we choose, it would be nice to have that as a possibility down the road if it made sense.
No, I mean, I understand.
It makes sense in terms of utilization of labor. Where it gets sticky is where the FLSA regulations are gonna kick in.
Yeah.
Something's gonna have to change.
Mhm. And back east is a lot different than Colorado.
Excuse me?
Back east, the way things happen back east is pretty different than how they happen in Colorado.
Yeah, but
Depends where you are in the east.
well, but I would.
I'd say South Carolina's a lot different than Virginia.
In most of the Denver metro area, combined fire EMS systems?
Denver Fire has Denver Health do ambulance service. West Metro is integrated, South Metro is integrated. I think most of them, but those are the 2 biggest ones down there.
Were you done, Chief Jones? Can I make 2 comments?
I'm good. Keep talking. I can talk at the end. I'm good with this.
2 comments. One, I meant to mention earlier. One of the things that we don't want to see happen with the volunteer component in the fire department is that the mindset get to be, because we had this happen in another department we worked with. The mindset was, as they added some career staff, the mindset was, we'll let the career staff handle most all the calls. We'll only use the volunteers on the big stuff. You don't want to go down that road.
Roll hoses.
Huh?
Or to roll hoses.
Well, because again, volunteers want to feel wanted, needed, and used. And if they're only being called on the big stuff, one, they're not typically experienced enough to handle the big stuff. They got to be doing stuff on a daily basis to get that experience. So, you know, it's still truly needs to be an integrated, everybody can do everything on the fire side between paid and volunteer, in our opinion.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I mean, there's so many interesting different models. And I mean, I always bring up Evergreen because that's what I'm familiar with, but Evergreen has EMS.
Right.
Only does EMS. They have 8 paid staff who are part of fire operations, but they actually are the people who do administrative, fire prevention, maintenance. Their operation, they don't really have the problem that you're describing, but that's a very common problem in combination departments is, hey, I'm never going to be first on the fire anymore. Like, I'm just going to be ended up doing some mop-up work. So just they get demotivated.
But again, yeah, if you have training nights, drill nights, even duty nights, and I'm just pulling an example at Georgetown and Idaho Springs, when you get both of those stations staffed, if you have 2 or 3 volunteers that want to be there for 3 or 4 hours that night, let them run the engine, run the calls out first, put the paid guys on the ladder truck to run structural stuff, give them those few hours of running the calls and handling what they need to handle as that crew.
Totally. I mean, I always bring up St. Mary's, right? There's a station up there. Having people who can engineer those trucks and pump them who live there. That's really the only hope of somebody putting out their house if they have a room and contents.
No, absolutely.
Because it's just
Right.
going to take too long for the career people from wherever they are down the hill to get there.
If you treat them like reserves, they're simply not going to be ready when it hits the fan.
They're gonna lose interest. They're gonna wither away.
Same
What
thing.
my experiences are.
Yeah, they learned that 100 years ago in the military.
The second thing I wanted to say is, just because we're done tonight, to me, doesn't mean we're done. If you guys need help, you got questions, you need, comments from us, you want, I don't know, whatever it is, short of coming back in here and doing a bunch of other work, one of the things as a company that we try to do is have that relationship. It's not about, we did this and now we're done. Thank you very much. Call us, text us, email me, If you got questions, if you want us on, if you're gonna do another meeting like this and you want us to be there, again, we'll be happy to.
Thanks. Marie, did we give them the money yet?
Jeremy, we'll let you have the final words here.
Just a couple things, thanks for the hard work doing this. If we take this home and read the report. Yeah, I think if you were a lot more data driven than people ever gave us credit for, that's not a bad thing. It's just the world I came from prior to taking this job, 6 years ago. Is the data either proves or disproves everything you're doing, good or bad, right? I think we can test that. I think when you get in the report, you're gonna find that the average for structure fire is 8, and like 38% of the time we have 2 calls at once. If you're into where we're at, that's up from like 20, mid-20s, like things are trending in a direction that maybe we thought they wouldn't. We used to run 1,200 calls a year. That was a huge amount. And we get 1576, I think was our high, and we're back into, I think in their data, it's probably 1430, 1435, and I think we got like 15 to 20 calls that we're trying to fix. So we'll be right about 1450. So we're still 250 calls ahead of our previous 11 to 1200 norm that we have for years.
That's an average of a call of some kind every 6 hours at 1,432, which is what the number was.
Put it in perspective, Central City Fire runs 250 calls a year. Right, just to put it in perspective, Evergreen runs like 3,100, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
Numbers with those guys, so we worked with them.
They come in bunches though. You get a snowstorm and you'll get like 15 calls
Right.
in 12 hours.
I just ask, we just take a look at the data. If you have questions or want more information, please ask. We've got way more to give you than what we could ever consolidate into this 135 pages, or whatever it says. And then the site apps every year just keeps working towards the end goal of making this organization work. I take that pretty personal because I agreed to change careers almost 4 years ago for this individual to do this, and driving change is part of that. And thank you for your participation up to this point in this. We just got to get it over the finish line. And I think you need to remember this as you talk to the public. The 4.569 mils was set in 1988. How much of our lives have changed since 1988 from a cost perspective, everything? Right.
Our tax base eroded.
All right, and that's, if you get into our tax base in 1980 post shutdown production at Henderson, to peak out of 41 million pounds a year to a 20 million pound a year current production rate with on the decline to the glide path at the end. I think we need to be open and honest about where we came from, where we're at now, and where we need to be beyond Henderson, beyond whatever that tax base looks like this in this process.
Mhm. Thanks.
Thanks, Jeremy. George, Randy, any final comments?
I really appreciate your suggestion to try to get this group together in a month or less. I'll be thinking most hard about engagement piece. What are the right questions to ask of them to get some guidance on these?
And this is a public meeting already, but I think we could do a better job of making sure
Advertising the
people are
meeting.
aware of it, and maybe even meeting in other places too, maybe doing a couple of different meetings in different parts of the county.
Let's do our best at getting this out there, which we always do anyway, but I mean, our best opportunity to let people know that this happened, make sure the paper and everybody else says, hey, they had this big meeting, they talked about this, and it's available, YouTube, Facebook, everything else, so.
And it'd be great to get the current to run a few pieces about this conversation so that people can learn about it that way too.
The current was aware that this was happening.
Did I just hear everyone's coming to Silverflow next month?
I was gonna make a suggestion that if you go out and do public meetings, have them in a fire station. Let them see what they have there and what they don't have there.
Yeah,
Good call.
appreciate that.
I already said a lot of words, so I'm good.
Anyone else have anything to say to close us out?
Do you mind if I take a little risk here and need about 3 minutes? Because I think this is with the issues and with the various interests that are here, I think there needs to be a clear motivation. So I'm going to read you something here. Takes about 3 minutes. Consider it the sermon. In 1996, Alan Brunacini, Phoenix Fire Chief, who's now deceased, Introduce the fire service to Mrs. Smith. Mrs. Smith is a hometown hero. Mrs. Smith is the why of the American Fire Service delivery. She is the OC, meaning the original customer. She represents our communities as well as endures the broad spectrum of problems in our communities that require fire service intervention. She includes all socioeconomic, social, political, racial, gender, sexuality, and religious perspectives. She is every person that calls us for assistance. Mrs. Smith must be the magnetic true north for the fire service and the center of our thoughts, training, and actions. We must actively demonstrate our care for her and the community rather than just speak of it. She requires a true response system that is built on the values we hold critical. We place Mrs. Smith as our top priority. We begin our response with the assumption we're going to save lives. It's going to save lives. We respond as quickly as possible. We respond without bias. We think critically to solve problems. We're competent in our work. Mrs. Smith needs professional fire departments that are led with the focus of competence and customer care. These departments must be led by caring and focused bosses that recognize the original customer as the most important element. They must build departments and cultures that reflect the values, attitudes, and behaviors that are critical to the customer and the welfare of the firefighters. Mrs. Smith needs professionals that know and understand the fire environment. She needs firefighters that can act swiftly and overwhelmingly to prevent or diminish harm and work so that she can survive. Mrs. Smith needs professionals that can survive the work because dying on the fire ground will always take away from our effectiveness. She needs consistent quality service that is striving to improve every day. She needs firefighters that are willing to learn and develop to better serve her. Lastly, Mrs. Smith does not need selfish or judgmental firefighters. She needs all of us to be good at our jobs and care for her as our own because her life depends on it.
Thank you. And as Mrs. Smith, as town of Georgetown Board of Selectmen, I fully support our. Upcoming board meeting.
I was gonna lose.
Sorry.
I was gonna lose one way or the other.
It's Smith.
You didn't know she was here, did you?
I'm gonna go play the lottery.
Mrs. Smith is always here. I think that's the
Yeah,
point.
exactly. Thanks for closing us with that. We have another board meeting next Tuesday.
We do.
And we are going to put our heads together and work on a straw man of what an engagement process could look like and how we can keep meeting like this until we make the progress that we need to make. And I very much appreciate all of you taking time out of a Monday night to come share your thoughts. And I appreciate the frank nature of your comments and take them to heart. So thank you so much.
And nobody left the room and it's an hour past the time and we're gonna.
Yeah. So we are adjourned.